Oh, they're in here? Yeah, I know.
Larry's not here. Do we have word that he's, hey, John, do we have word on Larry?
No, we need a quorum too, right?
Yeah, what's a quorum?
What is it, five?
5?
I don't know.
What's a quorum?
I thought it'd just be 4.
Is it
If there were
four?
7 members, wouldn't it just be 4?
Is it 4? I don't
I
know.
think it's just 4.
Four?
Here's ask our lawyer.
Joe, can you tell me what quorum is when you say that? I'm missing, can you tell me what quorum, there's 7 of us, but only 4. That's 4. 4 is quorum.
4? 4. It's 4.
All right.
Thank you, Joe.
He's calling him now. Aha, there he is. Okay, by my watch, it's 1 o'clock, and I'd like to call to order the January 30th, 2023 meeting of the Town of Kiowa Island Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm Frank Cassidy, the chairman of the board. And the board members who will hear the cases today are Morris Hannon, Lynn O'Leary, Larry Rosenfeld, and myself, Frank Cassidy, and Jay Lewis. Staff members present are John Taylor Jr., our planning director, and Joe Wilson, our attorney. Case rulings from this and any BZA meetings are available for public review and inspection during normal business hours here at the Town Hall. Our first order of business today is to the election of officers for this year. I'm going to open the nomination process now. I'll entertain nominations for chair.
I'd like to nominate Frank Cassidy to continue as chairman.
I second.
And I'd like to nominate Jay Lewis for vice chair.
Let's wait on that one. Any other nominations?
Sorry.
Okay, motion to close the nominations for chair,
Motion made.
and a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Frank Cassidy is unanimously reelected. I'll now entertain nominations for vice chair.
So now it's my turn.
Yes, it is.
I'd like to nominate Jay Lewis for vice chair.
And I'll second it.
Any other nominations? Motion to close the nominations for vice
So
chair.
moved.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, Jay Lewis is unanimously reelected. I'll now entertain nominations for secretary. Per town rules of procedure, the planning director is the secretary, but for some reason, we have to go through this process anyway. Someone care to nominate John Taylor?
I nominate John.
And a second?
I'll second it.
Close the nominations,
So move.
and I'll second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, John Taylor is unanimously reelected. At this time, I'd like to briefly explain the workings of the BZA. The Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-judicial body established to interpret and grant relief from the zoning ordinance. The Board of Zoning Appeals has jurisdiction over three types of cases: appeals, variances, and special exceptions. Appeals are heard regarding administrative changes or decisions by the zoning administrator or staff. Variances may be granted when strict application of the zoning ordinance would cause an unnecessary hardship. The board's actions must be based on specific standards as contained in SC Local Government Planning Enabling Act of 1994 and the Town of Keel Island zoning ordinance. Special exceptions allow the board to permit uses if certain conditions as contained in the zoning ordinance are met. Today, we're only concerned with variances. A simple majority vote of the quorum present is required to grant a variance or to overturn the decision of the zoning administrator in an appeal or to grant a special exception. Because today's hearing is a public fact-finding meeting, we're in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act and SC Code 6-29-70. 15 days prior to this hearing, an announcement was printed in the Post and Courier. A sign was posted on or near the designated properties, and a notice was mailed to the applicant or representative, to residents within 300 feet of the application, and to parties of interest. Persons, organizations, and the news media that have requested declaration of our meeting have also been notified. In the case of today's meeting, for which there's considerable interest, we also served notice to the public and pointed out that the meeting materials are available on the website through an e-blast. The Freedom of Information Act does not require notification of anyone other than the applicant and the parties of interest. Our purpose today is for interested parties to be heard in order to assist the board in gathering evidence pertinent to each case. If the members of the BZA feel the need for further information to clarify a case, the board has the authority to subpoena witnesses. In addition to testimony by our applicants, our board has been presented with written information submitted to the staff by the applicant or their agent in each case. This information is now considered to be evidence and is entered into the permanent record of this body. It is assumed that it is complete, true, and accurate. Also, we've been presented data assembled by the staff for the purpose of clarifying the application and the effect on surrounding property. This information was made available to the public on the town's website. Our board is empowered to approve with conditions, or deny requests. In granting a variance, the Board of Zoning Appeals may attach to it such conditions regarding location, character, or other features of the proposed building structure or use as the board may consider advisable to protect established property values in the area or to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. We are also authorized to defer a case should there be a need to obtain additional information. If an applicant's request is approved for a special exception, variance, or appeal of a decision by the zoning administrator, they must go to the town of Keel Island to apply for permits. Variances and special exceptions granted by the BZA are valid for 12 months after this meeting. However, if an applicant's request is disapproved and they wish to appeal the decision of this board concerning their case, appeals must be addressed to the circuit court. SC Code 629-820 states that the appeal must be filed by the applicant within 30 days after the decision of the board is mailed to them. Failure to file an appeal within the time limit deprives the court of the jurisdiction to hear this matter. Because this is a quasi-judicial body, everything said in this meeting must be complete, true, and accurate. All of the information provided to the BZA is considered evidence, and this board may certify contempt of circuit court if false statements are made, either in writing or orally. Staff has placed a sign-up sheet in the hallway for any person wishing to address the board. I will call individuals one by one to approach the podium to share public comments. We need to speak clearly into the microphone so that we get a clear record, and because we're live streaming on YouTube. Also, be reminded that all persons who wish to speak shall direct their comments to the board, not the applicant or speakers or parties of interest. Each person who wishes to address the board will be sworn in. To expedite that procedure, those wishing to speak in any of the 4 cases today, I'd ask you to please stand at this time, and Mr. Wilson will now administer the oath.
All right. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. It's clear that the majority of the people here are interested in the Mingo Point case. So with apologies to the other 3 applicants, you'll note that we've changed the order of the agenda to hear the Mingo case first. So I shall now call case BZA 22-000011 at 876 Keel Island Parkway. Staff will present facts pertinent to the case. I shall then call the applicant to address the case. The applicant shall please stand at the podium and state their name and business address for the record before presenting testimony. We will then hear from Lee Bundrick of the Kiowa Conservancy. The Conservancy has asked to provide testimony on the environmental aspects of the application. After each of the staff, applicant, and Conservancy presentations, I'll entertain questions by the board. I will then open the meeting to public comments, and I'll say more about public comments after the presentations. John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first case this afternoon, BZA 22-000011. This is a variance request, and it's to modify an existing dock located at Mingo Point, commonly known, and that's to extend beyond the maximum extension of a dock structure into the river, stream, or channel. The applicant is Kiowa Island Real Estate Company. For the record, I just wanted to clear that that's not the real estate company itself, but sort of the Kiowa Island Golf Resort as an affiliate of that company. And so I just wanted to clarify that in your materials. The applicant will be represented by Jen Hayes of Thomas & Hutton, who's the engineer on this project. And this is located at 876 Kiowa Island Parkway. TMS number is 207-00-00009. The subject property is zone R2/C and is part of the Resort Overlay Zoning District. It's approximately 11 acres in size. And so our town zoning ordinance per section 12-78 dock key locations, it states that the leading edge, and that's the edge nearest to the river, stream, or channel of a pierhead and or float structure shall not extend out into a river or stream more than 1/4 of the river or stream width measured at mean low water, or 50 feet, whichever is less. This projection is to be measured from water's edge at mean low water. And that's the purpose of today's variance request in this first case. So just to describe the property again, I stated that it's zone R2/C, and it's adjacent to the Kiowa Island Parkway. To the east, to the west, adjacent to a channel connected to the Kiowa River. A few areas of the site, you'll notice that this is, like I said, on the Kiowa Island Parkway as you approach Kiowa Island proper. The existing dock sits, you can see here. More images of the existing dock. And so the current property is maintained by the Gulf Resort and is utilized for recreational activities, nature programs, and other related activities and special events. The existing dock is authorized per our town key dock ordinance location for a floating commercial dock and a boat launch. The existing dock was permitted in 2000 according to Charleston County records, and according to the Department of Health, Environmental Control and Office of Ocean and Coastal Resource Management, that existing dock was permitted on March 13th of 2000. This is one of, the subject dock is one of 2 commercial docks on Kiowa. The other is located at Retz Bluff. So this dock is utilized by the applicant for kayak tours, boat rentals, and other boating and recreational activities. And the adjacent properties to the north and south are open space marshlands. Properties to the south across the open space are also marshlands and also zoned in that same zoning district, R2/C. The properties across this subject properties are undevelopable marshlands, and the subject property in this proposed structure is subject to review by the Architectural Review Board. The applicant did apply for permits from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and DHEC OCRM, who has jurisdiction in permitting docks. And the overall proposed work as depicted as part of those permit applications stated that, quote, the proposed work consists of removing the existing 4 by 155 foot boardwalk to a 12 foot by 16 pier head with a 4 by 18 gangway to 2 20 feet by 28 feet floating docks with kayak launches on each end, and replacing it with a 10 foot by 175 foot boardwalk to a 12 foot by 16 covered pier head with a 5 by 50 ADA gangway to 20 by 30 central floating dock with 20 by 28 floating docks and kayak launches on each end, end quote. And the overall proposed work as depicted as part of the OCRM application, similarly, the proposed project includes making modifications to an existing dock and to a boat ramp specifically to remove the 4 by 155 foot boardwalk, 4 by 18 foot gangway, and 12 by 16 pier head. They will be replaced by a 10 foot by 175 foot long boardwalk, a 12 by 16 foot covered pier head, and a 5 by 50 feet aluminum ADA gangway. The existing 2 20 feet by 28 feet floating docks with kayak launches and storage will be rebuilt, and a 20 by 30 foot floating dock added. In a separate location on the property, a 16 foot wide by 25 foot long concrete extension slab will be added to an existing boat ramp. All structures would be wood with the exception of floating docks, gangways, and the boat ramp extension. And the purpose of the kayak dock is for commercial use. The boat ramp is for private use as well as government agency and emergency use for water access, end quote. So staff will walk you through somewhat of a timeline here. In January of 2022, the town was notified the permit applications from OCRM and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers by a joint public notice for this proposed dock modifications. And per those public notice, the permit subject application, these determinations have been made, particularly by the Army Corps of Engineers. That, quote, this notice initiates that essential fish habitat conservation requirements of the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. Implementation of the proposed project would impact 0.12 acre of estuarine substrates and emergency wetlands utilized by various life stages of species comprising of the shrimp, the snapper grouper, management complexes. The district's engineer initial determination is that the proposed action would not have a substantial individual or cumulative adverse impact on the essential fish habitat or fisheries managed by the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council and the National Marine Fisheries Service. The district's engineer's final determination relative to project impacts and the need for the mitigation measures is subject to review and coordination with the National Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation. And that information is provided to you in your materials, so I won't go through all the provided additional metrics that's outlined by the Army Corps of Engineers in their materials. But I'm going to fast forward here to February 1st, of where the town did issue a formal letter in response to OCRM and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers during that public notice period, whereas stating the comments that proposed to the dock, they conflicted with the town's ordinance, and that's specifically section 12-78. And so at the time of that letter being submitted to OCRM and the Army Corps of Engineers, we also notified that the applicants, and that was on January 31st, we shared a copy of that formal letter and which outlined those concerns. Through the permitting process, OCRM and the Army Corps of Engineers, subsequently, the applicant reached out to the town regarding this particular project and the concerns that were outlined. And staff met with the applicant a few times, one on site, to discuss the project, the concerns, and present options for moving forward. At that stage, this is where the applicant was presented with the option for a variance. And so that formal letter that was issued to OCRM and the Army Corps of Engineers stated the requirements as outlined in section 12-78 dock key locations. The Town of Kiawah Island Land Use Planning and Zoning Ordinance requires, quote, that the leading edge of a pierhead and/or float structure shall not extend out into a river or stream more than 1/4 of the river or stream with measured at mean low water, or 50 feet, whichever and less. This projection is to be measured from the water's edge at mean low water. And so, as I continue, I want to show just a few images of the site. Here on the left, the nature programs and recreational operations. As you see here, the images of the dock approaching the gangway, existing boating. These pictures were taken, I believe these are from the 28th of November. And then there's some images that were captured later in January. These were, I think, at high tide and the others at low tide. You can see here at low tide. He's looking towards the south. These are views toward the north. So the width of the waterway is approximately 272 feet measured from mean low water to mean low water. And the existing floating dock structure at its furthest extent is approximately 32 feet from that water's edge, and that's measured at mean low water. In the proposed modification, the furthest extent of that dock would be 85 feet from the water's edge, still measured at mean low water. And the existing floating dock structure at its furthest extent would be approximately 240 feet from the across the waterway to the water's edge at mean low water. The proposed floating dock structure at its furthest extent is approximately 176 feet from the floating dock across the waterway to the water edge at mean low water. Kiawah's marshes have shown to be varied across the islands in different areas of accretion and erosion. And the waterway through shown aerial imagery over time shows the shifting of the waterway. The waterway has shifted westward over time, and the aerial images shown accretion on the eastern side of the waterway. And the depths of the waterway do vary. The waterway's shallowest areas are located on the accretion side to the east, and the existing floating dock currently sits on the mud at low tide. So these are a few images. I'm capturing just the timeline here. This begins in 2001. 2009. And to reference, I would kind of look at where the pier head is located, and you can see where the pier head is located back in 2001, essentially kind of over water. 2009, 2012, location of the pier head. 2015. In 2017, you see the location of the pier head now just over the marshlands almost entirely. And 2019, most current reached 2021 here as part of this sort of timeline here. So to walk you through the applicant's essential request here, based on the site plan that's been outlined, the conceptual, the applicant is requesting in black the location of the new modified dock. The existing dock here you can see in the image, essentially aerial, and they're requesting to go out to what's been identified in black. The areas that are located on this exhibit, based on green and blue, are metrics to show you relatively to the different code. In our zoning ordinance, as mentioned, there's a quarter of the water width and 50 feet, whichever is less. That is the maximum extension of a dock can go into that waterway. And in this case, the 50 feet would be less, which represents the green. So that would be the furthest extent, this sort of green line that's been highlighted by the applicant, the furthest extent without the need of a variance that they would be able to go. So a variance is required to go beyond this green line. And the blue is just to show you where the location of where a quarter of the width would be located. And this is all measured from mean low water to mean low water. Continuing, the nearest, go back to my aerial here, sorry. The nearest docks to the subject property are located to the south, and that's located at Little Rabbit. Two docks exist per our ordinance, which one is a neighborhood floating dock and the other is a shared floating dock. And according to Charleston County records, these were permitted in 2014. The proposed dock structure extends further than the 1/4 of the stream width that's measured at mean low water, or 50 feet, which is less. And as stated, that is the purpose of this variance request. The proposed dock structure is approximately 32 feet and ranging from approximately 28 to 36 feet beyond the maximum extension requirement. And per our zoning ordinance, those definitions that I've outlined of what a dock is the structure extending into or up upon a waterway, marshland, or other natural water feature that provides docking space for 10 boats or less. And in this case, the subject property is a floating dock, and so you see identified that a floating dock is a structure that has a part of a pier or dock that floats and provides easy access to moored boats. And just to note, continuing, the applicant has submitted to the Kiowa Island Architectural Review Board, and they have granted conditional approval on October 22nd of 2022. And the Kiowa Island Architectural Review Board states in their letter the design is approved to continue to final review and ARB permit. There were some considerations added as part of their letter that as they move forward, that they would provide further information regarding elevations, specific sheets, and/or details regarding the equipment storage boxes, kayak storage, and/or pier head roof. While the ARB's preference is for the kayak storage to not include a roof, it is a roof deeded should match the pier head roof material and/or be dark coloration. Similarly, the equipment storage boxes are approved to be located on the pier head, not the floating dock. And the the materials I provided should remain natural without painting or staining. If a gate is to be constructed as part of the new pier head, please submit a design for ARB review and approval, and the kayak storage is approved for the same number of existing kayaks currently being stored on the floating pier. As stated, staff made a site visit multiple times, and I will review the staff findings. I wanted to highlight these exhibits as part of the applicant's materials submitted. These are also included within the applicant's materials as part of the DHEC permit, Army Corps of Engineers permit. And it shows just the same, sort of more in a black and white drawing here, the proposed location of the floating dock and its extent. Here in elevation, or section rather, you see approximate grade of the depths there of the waterway. And so to review the approval criteria in which the BZA must make their decision, the first criteria A, staff believes that there may be extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the property, and that's a result of the existing structure's placement, the existing floating dock, and the shape and conditions of the adjacent waterway of the Kiowa River as accretion and the shifting of the waterway, and the existing floating dock currently sits on the mud at low tide. Per the applicant's letter of intent, quote, the maximum extension into a waterway stated in the ordinance assumes a waterway that is approximately symmetrical with its thalway, and that's the deepest part, and in the center part of the channel. That is not the condition here at Mingo Point dock, and noted above, the floating docks are located on the accretion side of the river. Over time, sediment has accumulated under and behind landward of the existing floating docks, to the extent that the floating docks are sitting on the mud at low tide. And the deepest part of the channel is on the opposite side of the river. There is ample width of a waterway for navigation, even with the proposed location. The second criteria, these conditions may be unique to the subject property and may not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. Subject property is Zone R2/C and within the Resort Overlay District. Adjacent properties to the north and south are open space marshlands. Located to the south across the marshlands, properties are located within the R2/C zoning district. And this property is one of two authorized commercial docks on Kiowa. The nearest authorized docks are located to the south, or neighborhood and private joint use residential docks. And existing structures in the vicinity may or may not have similar conditions of the adjacent water channel. Per the applicant's letter of intent, being in an area of accretion, the Mingo Point docks is experiencing something that is not considered typical on a navigable river. The size of the river, almost all properly permitted floating docks on the tidal waterways in Charleston County are not sitting on the bottom of the river at low tide. Criteria C, the application of this ordinance to 876 Kiowa Island Parkway would prohibit the construction of the proposed dock modifications, as the dock structure does extend further than the allowed maximum extension of 50 feet into the river stream or channel. And per our zoning ordinance, as stated before, that leading edge of a pier head or float structure shall not extend further out than the river or stream more than 1/4 or 50 feet, whichever is less. The proposed dock does approximately extend 32 feet out, and that's ranging from 28 to 36 feet approximately beyond that maximum extension. And that's all measured at mean low water. And the application of this ordinance may not unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. However, the applicant's letter of intent states, as previously stated, the use of the floating docks is severely restricted at low tide. In addition, vessels often become stuck in the mud as the tide falls. Criteria D, the authorization of the variance may not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent properties or the public good. The proposed dock is positioned further out away from the accreting marshes, allowing potential constrained salt marsh to migrate. And the proposed floating dock increases the distance of the extent of the dock structure into the river, reducing the overall width of the area east of the dock structure by approximately 32 feet. The character of the zoning district may not be harmed as the subject property is authorized for a commercial dock, as identified within our town's key dock location ordinance. And the applicants, as stated in their letter of intent, the average width of the river at the location of the Mingo Point dock is 285 feet. The variance request, if granted, would allow the floating docks to extend an additional 15 feet waterway of the quarter rule with a remainder of 180 feet of navigable width. And this includes the deepest areas of the river. There will be no impact to the navigable area of the river. The operations at the Mingo Point dock will continue as they have in previous years, with no intended change of use. The variance criteria number 3, granting of this variance would not allow the establishment of a use not otherwise permitted in this zoning district, extend physically a non-conforming use of land, or change its zoning district boundaries. Criteria F, the BZA may not consider profitability when considering this variance request. The applicant has stated in their letters of intent that the operation is at Mingo Point would continue as they have in previous years with no intended change of use. Criteria G, the granting of the variance should not be the result of the applicant's own actions. The need for the variance may not be the result of the applicant's own action. The waterway has shifted, impacting the existing dock structure, functionality, and per the applicant's letter of intent, the bathymetry of the river is a natural change over which the applicant has no control. And criteria H, granting of the variance may be contrary to the public or neighborhood interests and may adversely affect other property in the vicinity and may not interfere with the harmony, spirit, and intent and purpose of these regulations. Town has received many letters of concern regarding the impact to marine wildlife and the environment, given the proposed modifications to the existing dock. And as stated previously, the Architectural Review Board did issue a letter of conditional approval. Per the applicant's letter of intent, the programs offered at Mingo Point are tremendous benefit to the community, visitors, institutions, and agencies. And the programs work in harmony with the environmental objectives in the community. The facility is also a valuable resource for marine emergency personnel, scientists, and state and federal agencies. Criteria I, that the granting of the variance may substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan. Granting of the variance may not substantially conflict with the purposes of the ordinance. In the proposed plans, they exceed the maximum extension as stated. However, the dock is an authorized location for a commercial dock, and the town's comprehensive plan natural resources goal 2 states, develop and maintain an environmentally sustainable system of parks and open space which provide access to beach and the river, preserves, protects, and enhances natural resources, and meets the diverse recreational needs of the town's population. The comprehensive plan also states in Goal 3 of natural resources to maintain the existing quality of natural resources on the island, as well as the waters and marine environment. And Goal 4 of the natural resources element within the comprehensive plan states to maintain and expand public education and outreach programs. And per the applicant's letter of intent, in no way do we view conflicts with either the comprehensive plan or purposes of the ordinance. In review of this application, as stated by our chair, you have the ability to approve with conditions, or deny. Staff has outlined 2 conditions should you consider to approve. The other thing that I want to note in your packet of materials are 40-plus letters received regarding this particular case, ranging from concerns of the environment as noted. And so at this time, if there are any questions, I can entertain questions now.
Thank you, John. Questions from the board for John? No questions? Okay, Ms. Hayes, the floor is yours.
Do I need to state name?
Name and business
Business
address,
address.
please.
Jennifer Hayes, Thomas and Hutton, 682 Johnny Dodds Boulevard, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, 29464. Well, John, you covered about 90% of what I was going to say. So I appreciate that. I think John gave a great overview of the project and what we're requesting. I think one minor correction, we have revised the boardwalk width to be 8 feet instead of 10 feet. Just with internal discussions about that, we decided we didn't need the 10 feet to adequately accommodate two-way traffic of disabled persons. So that was our goal with that, was a wide enough boardwalk for ADA. I would like to say, you know, the primary issue at hand and the reason for the request for the variance is the accretion on our side of the river. We did, in the process of laying this out, consider some alternates. So we always like to say, okay, is this the best way to attack this issue? And in doing so, I just wanted to give you an overview. The other two alternates we considered: first, dredging. So dredging in any waterway is going to involve either a hydraulic dredge where they scoop out the dirt, or they suck it out. So a mechanical or a hydraulic, and they take that material off-site elsewhere. So we could remain in the same location, do repairs to the docks, whatever's needed, take out all the dirt and recover depth. To do something like that presents two major issues and obstacles. So environmentally, it's potentially, you know, one of the most harmful things you can do in a waterway. It's unpredictable, and you're disrupting a lot of habitat area. So from an environmental standpoint, we didn't feel comfortable with that. Plus, you have to do a continued maintenance dredge. So with this waterway, we don't know. We don't have the data, the long-term data on the Kiowa River to know at this location, but that could be once a year, once every 2 years, that we would have to repeat a dredge operation there. And not knowing the hydraulic situation, we don't know how that could potentially impact the adjacent properties. So that was a bit risky, and it had high environmental impacts. The second alternative we considered was relocating entirely to the location up at the north end of their property, so where the boat ramp is. And you can see in this aerial how tight that bend is on the Kiowa River. And when we looked at just the logistics alone of doing that in that location, it was going to be such a congested area, it presented a lot of safety concerns. So not only would we have the landward impacts of relocating the entire operation, but we also had substantial safety concerns. So that put us back to our current location and just shifting the dock a little farther into the waterway. And this is a similar exhibit to what you saw. But this basically provides, kind of in purple, this is the dock that we're requesting. These lines are the representative lines of the different thresholds. So it's a little bit confusing. With the Army Corps being the federal agency, OCRM being the state agency, and then we've got the town, everyone's dock ordinance regarding extension into the waterway is slightly different. So that's why it's important to know what these lines represent. We have requested what is consistent with what OCRM allows, which is 1/3 of the waterway when measured from marsh grass to marsh grass. The Corps measures mean low water to mean low water, and they allow for 1/3 with low water to low water, and that's what this red line out here is. So we're not requesting that extension. And then, as John covered, the town looks at low water to low water, and it's either 50 feet, which is the green line, of an offset from low water line to, or that quarter of a distance, quarter of the width from low water to low water, and that's what the blue line is. So it generated this section, which is, I think, very helpful just to get a comprehensive look. So this is a section through the river. And what we have, and tried to color code it, but the green lines on both sides, that's grass. The blue line that's just inset of that, that's low water. So that's where the water is at mean low water. And this focused area over here on the right, I'm going to zoom in on that. And you'll be able to see the different scenarios. So what's drawn in black and hatched, that's our existing location. And as you can see, the float is sitting there on grade. That dashed black line on the bottom is the grade contour of the bottom of the channel. And you can also see in this section, as we move left, so as we move further into the water, you can see how slowly we're gaining depth. So the green, which is if we didn't ask for a variance at all, we would be able to locate the dock where the green box is. So this is the floating dock. That's what that's representing. And you can see we have very little depth of water. So we hardly gain anything to move it out to the green location. Moving a little farther out, the blue, which was representing the quarter, so still that would be a variance from the ordinance. So we gain a little bit more and a little bit more when we get to the purple, which is what we're requesting. So it's pretty much a foot. We gain a foot of depth with each threshold of criteria that we're shifting out to. One thing that I'm not sure if, I don't remember you mentioning this, John, but we've looked at the accretion, so those aerials that you presented, we've looked at the rate of accretion over time, and it's approximately 1 foot per year. And at that rate, this buys us some time. But the farther we go, the longer we can go without hopefully asking for another extension as this river migrates. Docks will have to shift. And it's not unique to us. So that does happen on waterways. Accretion and erosion happens all the time in the tidal bodies, but these ordinances are in place, like John was reading in our explanation. It's really developed for a symmetrical waterway. So it has the mindset of your thalweg, the deepest part of the channel is in the center, and you want to maintain that you're not infringing on that. But as you can see, we're in the shallowest area. The deepest part is over here on this side, where this line is. So that's the deepest part of the channel, which is well away from where the dock is. You can also see the 180 plus dimension that I've got there, that purple. I know this is really hard to see. So that's the edge of the float to mean low water line on the opposite side. So that's the remaining navigable area. So even if we tie up a boat out here for their operations, we've still got 170 to 175 feet of navigable waterway. These are some photos taken last week. So our biggest concern with this is, well, it's threefold. We've got a safety issue because the floats don't float level. So the users, out here, this is twisted. So that's one thing. The second thing, obviously from a functionality standpoint for operations, that's a problem. But the third component is the environmental impact. If you look downstream and similarly upstream, there's shellfish beds on either side of this, and there's grass that's migrating out with the mud. Well, that's not happening here because the floats continually sit on the mud. So the shellfish that would naturally populate that area are not able to. And like John alluded or said, The agencies don't permit docks sitting on the mud. So we have conditions placed on dock permits where if they suspect it's going to sit on the mud, then they'll deny it, or they'll say you have to implement something to prevent that from happening because it is so harmful from an environmental standpoint. I think that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions from the board?
I just had one. You mentioned 1 foot per year of the accretion.
Yes,
What period has that been measured over?
a 20-year period. And I will
In
say,
other words, what
we-
you're saying is that this is inevitable, and 5 years from now, you're going to have to address the same problem.
Well-
Because the additional 2 or 3 feet of depth that you're talking about will disappear in another 2 years.
right, so what I was going to say
So
is,
therefore, you're looking at eventually moving further and further out into the waterway, which is counterproductive to doing things correctly. I don't know whether this is relevant, but I've been in boating my entire life, and every place where boats were moored, dredged on a biannual basis. They just did it as a standard thing. You're saying that dredging creates environmental problems, which I can understand, but you also say that once you dredge, you have to dredge regularly. Are you saying that once you dig a hole, the river will proceed to fill it at a faster rate? I don't see the river, overcoming your dredging at any faster rate than its normal accretion.
well, we don't know. That's the bottom line.
True.
We don't know when it comes to hydraulics. And so what I was going to say with the question about accretion, so we've tracked it over 20 years. So was that happening at a rate of 2 feet in the first 3 years, and then it slowed down? We don't know. We don't have that level of data. We've looked at a large period of time and the result of that. So we know that that's what's happened. We don't know the rate, and we don't know that it will continue at that rate.
Okay. Did you look at extending the length of the dock significantly, predominantly to the south, down towards the bottom of the screen here, at which case you wouldn't need to be docking on the inside of the dock, but could handle more on the outside of the dock and still stay within the 50-foot requirement? In other words, if you need more space to tie up to the dock, lengthen the dock rather than move it into the middle of the waterway.
Right, well, one of the requests is to add a section of float.
I know just one, but I was out there this morning at mean low tide. I've been out there several times in the last couple of months, and normally at mean low tide. And if you come down this way, you're not going to run into as much accretion of sandbars as you will if you continue up that way. So if they change their logistics, and instead of moving it out so you can use both the outer and inner edge of the dock, but increase the length of the whole dock, stay within the 50-foot length, and just have everybody board on the outside of the dock, which is more functional anyway, then you solve the whole problem without having to violate any of the laws.
I'd say maybe if we weren't outside of our property line, which we would be
Your
to do
property
that.
line extends all the way down, does it not? From what I saw, it extends past where your hand is coming now. So you could effectively double the length of that dock and not have to move it out into the waterway, correct?
I don't know, we'd have to
Didn't
look at
even
that.
look at that, did you?
No, we didn't.
Okay, thank you.
I have,
If you stay within the city or the town requirements, how long do you think it would be before there would be another potential problem?
If we were to stay at the 50 feet off of mean low water, we've gained a foot in one area of the foot, so that if you noticed, it's not straight, it undulates. So in one area, we've gained a foot, in one area, a half a foot of depth, and that's it. So I don't know if it's done accreting, then we sit there and we've got very little depth, but it's not getting worse. I don't know. But it's, if we continued at that rate, we have a year, but I don't know.
I had a question to ask about the docks. As we see, these boats are just sitting in the mud at low tide. Had the resort ever considered putting a lift in? There's many docks on the island that, for low tide, they're up and out of the water, so it doesn't hurt the shellfish. And it doesn't look like any of that has been taken into consideration for any of these suggestions that you guys have made.
Right, and you guys might need to speak to that. They do have a boat ramp where they usually take the boats out. So I don't know if,
Well, the only reason I'm asking that is that, one of the comments that you had said was that us leaving these boats sitting here, it's not letting the grasses grow and it's not letting the oyster beds come in. But a simple thing that many homeowners on the island have had to do to preserve that is put a lift in, but yet there's none of that mentioned in this presentation.
right, so I think what I was speaking to was the floating dock sitting on the mud. But the boats don't stay there long-term. My understanding is they're there during the day or during operations, but they are not sitting there long-term. Do you guys?
Yeah, please.
My name's Jake Feary. I work for the Key Island Golf Resort as one of the boat captains and one of the leads on the Mingo Point project. That's a good question. I think that all of our captains would love to have their boats out of the water so that it's less maintenance for the bottom of their boats. I can't speak to the number that would be allowed by OCRM in the area. We do have 4 boats that currently operate from the dock. It's my understanding that those would still have to be out over open water. And so bringing maybe up to 4 boat lifts out there, they'd still have to be in that water depth area that we could have.
So are the photographs of the boats just sitting in the mud just for the purpose today to show you that they're sitting in the mud? Because you're talking about it's the dock that's sitting in the mud that's not allowing the marsh grass and the oysters to repopulate. However, if it's just for purposes to make your point more direct, that this boat is sitting in the mud, and in one second you had said they pull the boats out, so then why are these boats sitting here in the mud? Is it more for photography and just to show us, or is it, have you guys actually
That's
looked
the
at?
only space we have at the dock. So we have to park that one on the inside, and it does occasionally sit on the mud at low tide.
So they don't trailer it out at all in any of those large parking lots? leave
They
it
do
there in
not.
the
They
mud?
sit on the dock. So they're gone for typically 4 hours a day, twice a day.
Okay.
I have 2 questions. Could you go back to that cross-section you were showing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then enlarge it the way you did before?
To this area?
That's good.
Okay.
It looks to me like the difference between the blue and the purple is pretty minimal. If we were to grant a variance so you could go out as far as the blue, would that be acceptable?
Elizabeth King. I work with the Recreation Department at the Key Island Golf Resort. The purpose of us going further out is to gain time. So with the purple being about 12 feet out and with our estimates of it accreting about a foot a year, perhaps we gain another 12 years of time before we are having to be in a situation where we're sitting on mud again. So the purpose here is to minimize dock construction. We know from an environmental standpoint that the construction process itself is one of the most detrimental aspects of the dock itself. If we can build it once and build it right, we anticipate this could last another 20 years, and that's what we're trying to do. The first dock lasted us 23 years. Now we're in a situation where we're having to rebuild, and we're taking into consideration all of the dynamics of the river and creating the situation where, looking at the trends long-term, we feel like the purple is the situation that is most environmentally responsible for us to do.
Excuse me?
I had one other question. You say in your testimony that there is no intended change of use for the dock. Would you be willing to commit to that as a condition of approval?
Well, as I had mentioned this in our public meeting that we had for all of the neighbors of the area, that we can't anticipate what we're going to do 15, 10 years down the road. But I think that, we've been operating out of Mingo for 20 years. I've been working with the nature program for 30. Jake has been here for 20 years. I would think that the reputation that we have for environmental education, trying to do the right thing, being environmentally responsible, should stand on its own. We have been constantly looking for ways to improve our program, ways to reach out to the Conservancy, ways to reach out to the environment, to be environmentally responsible, and that's our intent. But I feel like at this point, asking us to understand what our program would be like in 20 years, I'm just not comfortable in knowing what Mingo Point will look like in that time. But at this point, I can tell you that we have more business at Mingo than the Mingo River can occupy, and we know we don't want any more boats on the river, and we have, at this point, we work with Andel Bluff, and all of our overflow business does go over there because we feel like we've reached a strong balance between environmental protection and business levels. So what we have on the dock and what we operate both from a motorboat standpoint and a kayak standpoint, we feel like we've reached a suitable balance and have no intention at this point of increasing anything that we do, especially from a motorboat standpoint, because it would take away from the area that we've created in the special environment that we have on the western end of the Kiowa River.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just had a follow-up question on the use, and either one can answer. If you look back 10 years, has your use, hasn't changed, but has the volume changed in the last 10 years? Up, down, same?
Well, I can tell you, nature program during COVID was amazing, only because of COVID, and people wanted to get outside and be out in open air. But in general practice, over the past 10 years, I think we've stayed pretty consistent.
And if we grant a variance, would the volume go up? Not the use, but the number?
We've reached the capacity, so we do as much as we can possibly do out at Mingo Point. We don't want to do any more out of there, and that's why all the extra is funneled over to Bohicket Creek.
You wouldn't be changing your capacity then?
We would not be changing the capacity at this point, no. We have the proper number of kayaks, proper number of paddle boards. We're comfortable with what we can handle out of there, and we don't want to do any more. You have too many people, it takes away from what makes Kiowa special.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Ms. Hayes.
Thank you.
Mr. Bundrick, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Lee Bundrick. I'm with the Kiowa Conservancy at 80 Kestrel Court. So today I'm entering into evidence our environmental assessment of the proposed Mingo Point dock for this case for the BZA, and to provide some information regarding our environmental assessments on the island that we already conduct, and provide it kind of for this specific area related to the Mingo Point dock. So in consideration of the information that we're gathering and looking at, we looked at the proposed dock improvements based on the U.S. Army Corps public notice, both from the aerial standpoint and the side standpoint. So we're trying to look at the potential environmental impacts from both of these kind of dimensions and sort of go into a further analysis. Throughout this presentation, I'll include several different things, including the current proposed dock. So this is from South Carolina DHEX mapping files. So this is the current outline of the dock as it stands now. And this is the proposed dock improvements based on the plans that we received from the resort just earlier. So kind of go over a brief overview of the coastal regulations, which I know John and Jen covered just a minute ago, but kind of show our analysis of it. We wanted to check in to see what the measurements were. And we used this specific imagery provided by the resort to us to conduct the analysis and to kind of corroborate the numbers. So we looked at the maximum allowance by the U.S. Army Corps, which is 1/3 of the width of the water body at mean low water on tidal water bodies. And this is about the same as what DHEC would consider, but they measure from vegetation to vegetation based on some of their other regulatory requirements in their 30-12. And similar with the town of Kiawah Island, we have our own ordinances here that look at the width of the river or stream at 1/4 of the measured at mean low water or 50 feet, whichever is less. So we have the 1/4 and the 50-foot rule, which are in discussion today. And these are the lines sort of kind of juxtaposed next to each other. So you see the 1/3, 1/4, and 50-foot in question here, each representing about 33%, 25%, and 18% into extending into the river. And currently the dock sits at 10% into the river at the moment. And kind of considering the dock size, we looked at the changes in the proposed dock improvements, and we also went out and measured the dock in specific areas that we wanted to get more information about. So the dock, as currently measured, and with the improvements, we see that there is an 1,150-foot increase in the boardwalk size. So from the upland area all the way out to the pier head. The pier head shows no change. The gangway shows 178 square foot change based on the ADA accessibility and the slope. And we see that there's an additional central floating dock, which adds about 600 square foot. And overall, we see about 1,600 square foot or 71% change in the dock size based on these improvements. And generally looking at the regulations, there's no specific regulations about the actual dock size from DHEC, but it does show that they don't, and after conversations with DHEC, they say they wouldn't allow a dock structure larger than any potential dock structure in any location based from what they say there. So there's not really a limit on the size of the docks per the regulations. And generally, the town of Kiawah Island shows that they rely on the SCDHEC and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers permits to decide on the dock size. So one of the potential concerns about the increase in dock width is looking at the vegetation. So vegetation can be shaded due to an increased dock width and cause minor impacts to docks. So we did include some analysis about potential impacts to that area. So we looked at the vegetative cover analysis based on aerial imagery from 2021, and we determined that the vegetative health in this area is generally moderately high, so it's about 89% vegetative coverage. And with this vegetative health and the elevation in this area, we see that there is a net sediment budget that's in a slight deficit. So the marsh is actually releasing more sediment than is actually being made within the marsh platform. But based on this analysis, I believe there's not much major impact to the vegetation in the area, but mostly minor impacts due to dock shading. And it was discussed before and looking into kind of the changes in the shorelines, and we wanted to quantify those changes and to look at how are the marsh shore banks accreting and eroding. And we do have historical imagery from 1977, which is right around the time Kiawah Island was being developed. And we also have imagery from 2021, and it's hard to see the changes just by looking at the aerial imagery. So we drew the lines for each year to represent where the shoreline changes based on specific imagery years. So we have 1977, 1994, 2009, and 2021, which is the most recent USDA NAPE imagery that we could see. And these methods that were used for this were based on a AMBER study conducted by Jackson for the entire state, but unfortunately this was not conducted for this specific area of the Kiawah River, so we conducted our own analysis. And what we see is that there are several different changes in this portion of the river. So you can see up in the upper areas above Mingo Point, you see that there's a loss in sediment. You can also see a loss in sediment on the western side of the Kiowa River and accretion on the eastern side of the Kiowa River, especially close to where the dock is currently. And this change in river is from 1977 to current. But, since the dock was built in 2000, we want to look closer to what that year was. So we looked at the changes from 1994 up until now. We see that the west bank is eroding about 20 foot in that time period, and the east bank is accreting 22 foot in this time period. And looking further into the design, so they created a topographical map of the creek sediments underneath the water body. And you can see that the dock where it currently stands, so you see that there is, let's see if I can get it, right here, you generally see that the dock is sitting about 0 to 2 foot of water depth at mean low water. So at mean low tide, the dock is more often than not going to be sitting on the creek bank. And the proposed dock has 2 to foot water depth in the proposed plans. And based on aerial imagery we've received from Coursera International, which is a joint project with the town, the community association, and the Conservancy, we received this imagery. And we also used some of the digital elevation models to look at the measurements from shoreline to shoreline for the regulatory standpoint. But this is representing the dock where it shows that it is currently sitting on the banks at mean low water, but not actually at mean low water, but about 0.7 foot above. And last week, when going out to the dock for the public comment, where they had a public sort of discussion period, the tide elevations were about negative 1.1 mean low water, and about a third or more of the dock was actually sitting on the creek bank, which is important to consider for the environmental standpoint. So what we see is that based on the accretion rates, we have about 20 foot on this area, and from 1994, and 30 foot since 1977. So we have a 27-foot change in pier head position, which is right between those. And we have a 55-foot change in the floating dock position in order to get access to the thalweg or the navigable water channel. And lastly, we wanted to look into the faunal impacts, and a lot of this has to do with the construction and use of the dock, which it's hard to quantify and to say what's going to potentially happen in the future. And I think the resort has mentioned several things in their discussion about their intended use, but we won't go further into that, but provide some information about the potential impacts to fauna in the area. So per the public notice by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they looked at essential fish habitat and endangered species, and they determined that there was no cumulative or individual adverse impact or impacts on the endangered species or their critical habitat. And to go further into this, they looked at 5 different species which are found in this area and determined that there was no adverse impact to them as well. And also stated by John, this was also sent to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service for additional information about impacts which they can make comment on. And lastly, so getting into bottlenose dolphins, there's quite a bit of comments about bottlenose dolphins within the community, and we sought to look into this a little bit further. One of the things we notice is that water quality is an issue for dolphins specifically in the Kiowa River. Right now we have a shellfish bed closure in the area due to environmental contaminants, but there's not anything about potential boat use in the area. Dolphin mortalities, so if we look at information about dolphin mortalities throughout the southeast and Gulf, we see that less than 3% of dolphin mortalities are directly attributed to boat strikes. And some mortalities in this instance, it's hard to determine whether or not boat strikes are actually the actual cause of death in dolphins, but with conversations with other marine mammal experts, we found that there are sublethal impacts to dolphins from boat strikes based on these assessments. So boat strikes may not cause the death of dolphins, but it definitely leads to deteriorated health of dolphins in specific instances. Looking into the construction, we were told that the construction will cause impacts to dolphins in the short term, especially in turbid waters where they rely on the echo communication to sort of navigate through the waters. and could also impact fisheries in the area by moving them into other areas. One other thing to consider with dolphins is that they sort of like these gently sloping banks in order to strand feed. And if you have a structure on these banks, or if you have potential oyster reefs in this area, it prevents them from using them effectively. So it removes that habitat for them to be able to use that area for strand feeding. And, based on anecdotal evidence from the community and from dolphin experts in the area, there are strand feeding events that happen in this area and quite frequently. And also to just restate this, the Marine Mammal Protection Act shows that you need to be 45 foot from land in order to stay a good distance from dolphins, and 150 foot from vessels from dolphins, but there's no stated impact from docks that I understand. To look at fish and benthic organisms is definitely recommended to keep docks off of sediments in order to promote beneficial algal growth along stream banks. Docks resting on marsh banks also do inhibit the ability for oyster reefs to form, so it removes that habitat and the ability for intertidal oyster reefs to form on these areas, as well as other shellfish. And then docks have different changes in fish assemblages. So the boating activity may drive some fish away, but the shading provided by the dock, the floating dock, does kind of promote a safe haven for fish based on, several people, including myself. I'm a fisherman, so, I fish near docks quite frequently because I get under the docks. But this is difficult to quantify under turbid water, so a lot of it's based on anecdotal evidence for that. So just kind of overview for this, the proposed dock position corresponds to the westward shift in the river, not mainly kind of having a discussion about the extension, but mainly that the concerns about the accretion and erosion in this area they correspond with the concerns with the resort. We see that there are going to be minor adverse impacts to regional vegetation, but we see that as very minimal for this area. There's no stated impacts to endangered species or the critical habitat from federal regulators. And we do see that boat traffic and construction present adverse impacts to marine mammals in some instances, but moving the dock and the placement of that dock is important to consider based on the ability for having dolphins have suitable habitat for strand feeding. That is all I had today, but I'm more than happy to go further into this. So.
Okay, I have reached the limit of my ability to continue this meeting without a break. So I'm going to call a break until 2:30, then we'll take questions for Mr. Pundrick and the public comments. Yes, John?
Can I just make a point of clarification before public comments?
Sure. All right, so we're going to break until 2:30 at this point.
Excuse me?
Okay.
So we're not supposed to talk about it, or we are supposed to talk about it?
We're supposed to. We're not there yet.
Oh, we're far from it. They want to do one way and that's it.
There we go.
What did I do wrong?
Still got coffee? Yeah. You live near her? Yeah, you live near?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Good.
Thanks, Morris. Four more docks downstream from the beach areas.
Okay.
Break was needed.
Wasn't it? Yeah, I know I needed it.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Logistically, they're putting more docks at risk if there's a storm by being so far out in the river because you're more down.
I have no idea if that's the case or not. I really don't. I'm not a,
But I think I'm just asking more, how do you protect this docks downstream legally if this dock is involved? How else to ask the question? How do you protect downstream? I think it's more risk.
Okay, I've got 2:30, folks, so let's get started again.
Do you know what I mean?
Lee, you're still up.
I do, but I mean, I don't.
All right. Questions by the board for Mr. Bundrick?
Just a clarification, I thought I heard earlier that the boardwalk was being reduced from 10 feet to 8 feet?
Yeah, that's a great
With-
question. Yeah, and we use the Army Corps', the permitting public notice for that, and we didn't consider that. We just based it on what was given to us. So, but I think conversations with Resort, they mentioned that as well, and they included it in here, so.
Okay.
Just a point also, when you had your map up on the accretion levels, am I correct that most of the accretion is taking place north of the existing dock and not south of the existing dock?
Different accretion rates across the whole area, but the area where the dock is did show a 30-foot accretion from 1977 to 2021.
Right, but again, south of the dock, there's virtually no accretion at that particular point.
No, there would be half as much accretion in that portion as it would be in the northern
North.
portion, yes.
Correct, thank you.
Other questions for Lee? All right, thank you, Mr. Bundrick.
Thank you.
The committee had asked Jen the question about pushing the dock further to the south, further towards Inlet Cove or Beachwalker County Park. I did want to clarify, because we never brought this up to Jen as an option. We want to be good neighbors. We want to do the right thing in the community. And for us, staying further away from the residents on the point was an important consideration for us. And that was one reason why we never considered moving further down, closer to their properties.
Did you discuss with them their feelings on moving out into the river versus moving closer but still staying close to the bank?
We absolutely talked about our intention of moving further out, and that was the whole purpose of last week's community meeting, was to get everyone out there to understand the reasoning why we were asking for this variance.
Basically, how far away is the existing dock from your nearest neighbor? And if you extended it 50 or 75 feet further towards them, how far would it be at that point?
I do not know the answer to that. But the second thing that I wanted to clarify is that we are prepared at this point, if we are given this variance, to go ahead and put in writing that we would not increase our operation levels.
Thank you.
So can I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
In regards to that? When you say you're not going to increase your operation levels, then why was the need not only to make the dock go out so much further, but to increase the size of the dock so much if you're not going to increase the level of activity at the dock?
100% safety. So as we happen right now, we run kayaking trips throughout the day. You take the kayak out of the slip so that the next kayak can come in. We're placing it on the dock super quick. And then at that same time, motorboat trips might be coming in, fishing excursions, leaving. And the way it stands now, we literally have children stepping over kayaks, stepping over hoses to get back to Mingo proper. So it is completely for a safety issue that we can operate on the deck without having people worried about tripping over something.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
One more point. When the resort builds the second hotel, which is inevitable, is it not also true that you will be under increased pressure? I'm not saying you're going to voluntarily do it, but be under increased pressure to increase the amount of output you have from that dock. I mean, there will be, again, twice as many people visiting the island in the high point,
Roger
at
Warren.
which point,
Roger Warren is going to answer that question.
thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't on the list, but you said I could do this, so I will. Certainly the increase of the, whatever we build at West Beach. It's been talked about a lot being a hotel. It's been 12 years since we started talking about that. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but it's going to be something. But the program at Mingo Point is not a very, what I would call, profitable venture. It's not something we do, and it's not the success of anything new that we build is not going to be hurt by having Mingo with basically a business plan as it exists today. Because as Liz said, we do take the others then over to Bohicket, and we have the opportunity to expand that business over there. So I don't think it's really an issue that anybody should be concerned about, that somehow Liz will be forced by me to increase the program there because I would honor this agreement, because I think it's important that you understand that the limit we're at right now is the limit that we see is best for both the program, for the environment, and for the relationship with the community and taking care of the guests that we have.
I'm not suggesting that you have a financial motivation for it. I'm suggesting that with twice as many guests on the island, the pressure on you is going to be to create perhaps a larger program. And if so, temporarily, before they find another facility, another location, another this, another that, I think the pressure is going to exist upon you.
I wouldn't worry about it. I don't think that pressure is the concern of this group relative to what the growth. We wouldn't be doubling the number of people on the island. Anything we can do there is limited by ordinance, and it's 150 bedrooms, so that's about 1/2 of what we have at the sanctuary right now. But the business levels that we have right now have been the highest business levels that we've ever had in the history of the resort, and I frankly don't see those business levels growing any more than what we would bring in with perhaps a product down at West Beach. But I don't see that as almost an issue that you have to be concerned with relative to this particular project.
Okay?
Anything else? Okay, folks, we'll now proceed to public comments. And before we start, I just want to state a few guidelines. I'm well aware that there's considerable energy around this application. Nevertheless, I intend to run an orderly and respectful meeting. You've been a great group so far. Let's continue with that. I'll call speakers in the order that you signed in on the sheet. Come to the podium, state your name and address, and make your statement. Statements are limited to 3 minutes. If your point has already been made, please feel free to pass. We already know there is considerable opposition to this application. Repetition is not going to influence us. At the end of the public comments, the petitioner will have a chance to respond as they see fit. Okay, the first speaker is Jim Martin.
Nothing like being first up. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Martin. I reside at 123 Bobcat in Riverview. And I'm speaking on behalf of the Riverview POA. I should also add that I started visiting Kiowa in 1981, built a home on Jack State Court in 1993, lived there until 96, and built our present home over the last 2 years. I only say that to make reference that I'm not a newbie to the area and have used Mingo Point on and off over the years many times. But I am speaking on behalf of the Riverview POA today, which comprises 34 homes in close proximity to Mingo Point. The Riverview Board submitted a formal objection to the variance request, which should be part of the record and should have been provided to you in advance of this hearing. The board's submission provides a detailed explanation of why the applicant's variance request fails to satisfy the statutory requirements for granting a variance, and thus the BZA cannot properly approve the requested variance. I won't now go over each of the procedural and substantive objection in the board's letter, but do want to emphasize just 3 points. First, this is not about whether the Mingo Point dock should be repaired or replaced. It is clearly in poor condition. This is solely about whether the applicant should be permitted to enlarge and extend the dock beyond what is permitted by ordinance, 85 feet into the river, nearly 60 feet beyond the current dock edge, and 35 feet beyond what is allowed under the town's dock ordinance. Second, the BZA may grant a variance only if, and I quote, exceptional circumstances exist, and where practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship is so substantial, serious, and compelling that relaxation of the general restrictions ought to be granted. Furthermore, the applicant must demonstrate and the board make a finding that each of 9 criteria are met, not 1 or 2 of the criteria, but all 9. Third, as noted, the submission from the Riverview Board shows that there are no exceptional circumstances, nor practical difficulty or unnecessary hardship of a substantial, serious, and compelling nature. The submission also shows that 6 of the 9 criteria are not met. It is simply untrue, as a matter of fact, that the Mingo Point dock is rendered unusable because of existing conditions. One need only look no further than the calendar of events in the today and the application that is or the applicant's website, which shows many activities that can be booked yesterday and today and tomorrow. These are all happening as we are here today. There is no caveat in the applicant's website that says that these activities can be canceled because of a low tide. There is simply no basis for a finding that existing conditions render the facility inoperable. Moreover, the case materials provided to the board show that if the dock were to be extended as permitted without a variance, there would be 3 to 4 feet of water at low tide, which is well more than sufficient for a draft for kayaks and the fishing boats used by the applicant. Simply put, there is no reasonable basis for granting a variance to allow the applicant to extend the dock 35 feet further into the river than allowed by ordinance. And given the objections raised on the record by nearly 150 adjacent property owners and numerous other residents on Kiowa Island, the public interest is clearly that the request should be denied. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Next is Perry Molinoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Perry Molinoff, and I live at 10 Blue Heron Pond Road. I'm a resident of South Carolina, and I'm here for 2 reasons. First, I'm the president of Preserve Kiowa, and several of our members and supporters are residents very close to Mingo Point, and I'm here to oppose this application on their behalf. Secondly, I kayak and paddleboard and have done that many times on the river, and I'm concerned from a personal perspective of the impact of a large dock extending about 1/3 of the way across the river will have on that environment. I'd like to address 4 assertions that have been made. The first is that the current dock is not usable. I was there about 10 days ago on the community dock on the point. There were 3 boats tied up to the outside of the dock. There was a 4th boat that was aground inside the dock. So when they say not usable, what they really mean is they can't use the inside of the dock, although the outside is still perfectly functional. It's been suggested that the consideration be made to extending the dock down to the south rather than extending it out into the river. I would also point out that power boats can be stored on trailers and they can be launched from trailers. They already have a launch ramp. I gather that there is some proposal to extend that, but you could alleviate a lot of these problems by putting the fishing boats and the touring boats onto trailers. As has just been pointed out, the situation is both common and expected. Accretion and erosion of riverbanks is what rivers do. If you look up and down the river, there are, I think, 4 docks visible from Mingo Point. All 4 of them are facing exactly the same situation. There's no water on the inside. There is water on the outside of the dock. And so it's very hard to argue that this is a completely unique and different kind of result. Fourthly, Mingo Point is not a community asset. I used to think that it was, and about, I don't know, half a dozen years ago, I drove and parked my car in a pretty much empty parking lot, and I unloaded my kayak and went kayaking. And when I came back, I was met by someone who told me that I was trespassing, that it was not a public facility, and that I should find other places to launch my boat. I believe that there are a couple of options. My preferred option is to rebuild the existing dock where it sits, to take the pressure off of the fishing boats by putting them on trailers, and to just proceed. A second choice would be to rebuild the dock 20 feet further out into the river. This is allowed by rules and regulations, and I think no one would have a serious objection to it. We do object and hope that you will not approve going out 85 feet. from the existing location of the dock. It will have deleterious effects on all sorts of aspects, including aesthetics, the habitat, and the like. And so I would urge you not to approve this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Robert Shepard, I'm sorry, Todd Bonney, is it?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to defer my comments to the end of the public speaking period, if that's okay?
Defer your comments
To the end of the public comment period, so that my comments aren't repetitive of other people's comments?
Okay.
Thank you.
Robert Shepard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bob Shepard. I live at 14 Little Rabbit Lane. I own the point lot at the end of the point. Not the first dock, but the second dock furthest away from Mingo Point is my dock. I just want to make a couple of points. I've listened to everybody talk about how the river is accreting and doing this, that, and the other. I mean, one thing is absolutely true is this river is constantly changing. I mean, I used to live in Inlet Cove years ago, 20 years ago, and then I built, my house, a little over 5 years ago. And, I'm on the river all the time. I got a flats boat, with sonar, and then I've got a fishing kayak. I'm in the river all the time. And I know how it is constantly changing. I mean, from one year to another, something can be, 2 and 3 feet different in elevation. The sand just kind of piles up, and then another event, godly event comes along and it's changed again. But, on the other side of where Mingo Point's dock is, I know we've listened to some testimony about saying that's the deepest part of the river. The middle part of the river right there is where at dead low tide, any big boat is going to kind of go through the middle. The further you get, the Mingo Point dock out into the river, it's going to make that channel that much more narrow. I can tell you, as you get close to the western side, that the water is nothing close to what it says on the Army Corps of Engineers map. If you look at that map, it talks about the water level there being, 9, 10, 12 feet deep. It's not, okay? I mean, it may have been when they took it, but as somebody that's in the river all the time, always looking at sonar and knowing how deep the water is, I'm just telling you that information is not current. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Stephen Henchak, is that correct?
Good afternoon to the board. My name is Steve Henchak, Bob's neighbor. I live at 12 Little Rabbits. So we're the dock that is actually the closest without being our community dock. Our community dock is actually closest, and our floater on the other side is the one we reside at. So our house is probably one of the closest views out to what's going on at Mingo on a daily basis. Our windows tend to look that direction, so we see a lot of the activities out there, and we're good friends with the folks at Mingo. They're very helpful, being neighbors on the river and all. So I guess the point I would make, and not to be repetitive of what Bob said, but also having a boat on the river and having navigated it all the way from under the Kiowa Bridge all the way out through Captain Sam's Spit, there's been a tremendous amount of change. I mean, I'm not even navigating out Captain Sam's Spit anymore, and I'm not quite sure how much the boat captains are even traveling out that water, because it's been a lot of change in the channel itself, particularly over the last year or so that I've been trying to get out there. We've since let go of our boat, but we kind of look at this from a perspective of what's kind of happening out the window. And so there is a significant amount of kayak launches. I mean, when they launch en masse, there's a tremendous amount of people out there. And I watch folks come down the river all the time that are making that turn on the corner. And that is the deeper side that people tend to use. But I would agree with Bob's comments that I think there's some pretty significant variations in depth. There's an island that emerges down near Inlet Cove, for instance. As I look down towards the Spit, the right side of that, and I actually just showed folks pictures of it on my phone, has filled in across. So there's kind of two channels. You either go next to Inlet Cove or you go against the bank on the opposite side. there's actually a sandbar that's filled in across there that I'm glad I know about now if I had my boat out there, because at mid-low tide or below, it would be a significant problem, trying to navigate through there without certainly going slow, and probably at low tide wouldn't get across it anymore. So the reason I say all that is because there's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of traffic. There's folks that are coming over from the other side of the river now, especially since Kiowa River has come up. The folks are docking over there as well. People are they're traversing through that space more than I've ever seen. We've got jet skis running through there now as well. So I'm really concerned about narrowing that space down and having folks that, most of the folks that I watch come out there don't stand up on the paddleboard so well. They don't, necessarily navigate in the kayaks as well either. So it's a novice, this isn't an expert sport we're doing out there. And there's, I know we had folks pulled up on Bob's dock before that needed to have rescuing and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of pedestrian activity. Pedestrian type folks trying to do an outdoor activity. When we narrow that down and we have 2 crossing boats and we have those kind of things, I think that really needs to be taken into consideration from a safety perspective. It's just, it's really pinching the river down. It's also, and this may not be the exact point of what we're talking about, but the expansion of the dock as well, trying to expand how big it is. I get what we're saying, but it seems like we could come up with some other alternatives there, like putting up temporary racking systems to rack the kayaks quickly, get them out of the way, clear them off the dock for the day and put them back, something of that nature, as opposed to necessarily having to have a longer dock as well.
Wrap it up, sir.
Okay. So I think in kind of summary of that, if you look back from Cacique today, you can, from over a half mile away, see the red and blue kayaks that are sitting out there. It'd be my personal preference, we don't see twice as many of those sitting out there as well. To an expansion of operation might mean more dollars, but I also would ask in the sense of just expanding your ability to operate the same business more efficiently doesn't necessarily mean you have latitude to add 50 more kayaks to the dock.
Thank you, sir. Lauren Rust.
Hello, my name's Lauren Rust. I'm the director of a local nonprofit that does a lot of dolphin monitoring, both on the Kiowa River and mostly down at Captain Sam's Inlet. And so really just some points and comments would be whether the dock is, done at the 50 feet or the variance, or there is dredging. We do know that the dolphins strand feed on either side of the dock, so just keeping that in mind as far as whatever the decision is made and whether dredging is part of it, the environmental impacts, especially to the strand feeding sites. We know it's a certain number of animals feed in the Kiowa River, live in the Kiowa River, and use that all year round. One of my points was traffic, but it sounds like there may not be more increased usage of the dock. But again, just kind of inhibiting the dolphins using those banks. And then I would just recommend having a monitor out there. It's pretty common when marine mammals can be affected by construction that a lot of places will hire a MMO, or marine mammal observer. And this would just be somebody that would observe you could do before, during, and after, and could provide recommendations if there are changes, if there's damage to the banks, just somebody that can provide information who's kind of keeping a lookout, and if there are significant impacts, could make recommendations to whoever is doing the development. I would also suggest time sensitive. I don't know if that is possible. I'm not totally familiar with timelines on building a dock, but we do know the dolphins do feed significantly between June and November. So I'm sure this would probably take longer than that, but if there's any sensitivity to time, I would recommend that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Seufert, is that correct?
Question. Perfect. It's actually Jim Seufert. 15 Little Rabbit Lane, representing the owners there. As you know, we have a few of us here. I was going to walk through the points on the variance criteria, but I think you all get it. You're all smart enough to realize that most of these don't qualify. For the record, though, the first two, which is the conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity, as well as there are extremely and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. It was stated by the study a while back, for the record, that, yeah, this is happening all the way south of us. So already, if you have to have 9 of them qualify, 2 of them are out the window right there. Having said that, I want to kind of touch on something here. No offense to anybody, but many of those pictures we all saw were low tide. Low tide. And if you as boaters, especially kayakers, know that you don't need a lot of water to float a kayak. You don't. And if you look at the tides, which are readily available on the internet, and go back and just look at the last year, most of the time, during hours of operation where you're renting kayaks at Mingo Point, it's an inconvenience, but it's not a problem. It's not shut down, it's an inconvenience. So it only takes about 6 inches of water to float a kayak. Something I want to give you a visual on, because I'm a paddle boarder. Been paddle boarding for many years. Been a full-time resident for the last 2 years. I'm out there all the time. And the Mingo Point personnel here do a fantastic job of corralling the guests, making sure they're safe, doing the proper training. And Steve just pointed out, when they get out on the river, now think about this. You've got now a third of the way more out into the river, which limits the distance from the end of that dock to the other side to, what, 170 feet, I thought I heard somewhere in there. So you have to stay what? You got to stay 150 feet away from a dolphin. A stand-up paddleboard of 10 feet legally is a vessel. So here's what happens. I've seen it. I see it all the time. So now visualize that dock being out, and now 10 novice paddleboarders on a vessel are going to get out there, and the first thing they do is talk about safety, how do you stand up, the navigation, just tips on how to move forward, right? So now that is going on, and that's going to take up a lot of space.
Wrap it up, please, sir.
Sorry?
You're out of time. But
I'm out of time, but I'm going to wrap it up. So keep in mind now, and I'll just wrap this up, that it is not a no-wake zone over there presently. So now you've got paddleboarders, you've got dolphin, and you've got a space that now does this. So just keep that in mind. One more point. We have never had the opportunity to talk about expanding, going south for the current dock. We'd be more than welcome to have that conversation. It never happened. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. John Clifford.
Thank you. John Clifford, 4 Little Rabbit Lane, resident of Kiowa. And I'm happy that Mr. Kendrick left his map up, and I'm not going to restate any of the points here other than arbitrary and capricious. I think, as you all know, as board members, were you to grant this variance today, it would be considered arbitrary and capricious. The applicant, in its own words, has given you plenty of reasons why the circumstances that would mandate the grant of a variance are not serious, compelling, or unusual. They're not abnormal. We've heard their own testimony say it's a normal occurrence on this river. And thank you, Mr. Kendrick, for pointing out what's happening to the river up there, as you can see, is the best place and the most logical place to grant to site a dock is where the boat ramp is. You've already said you're only going to gain a foot. You're losing a foot a year at the current location. So why are you going to put the dock there? This applicant has 11 acres. The unusual and circumstances need to occur at the specific location. Well, they've got 11 acres to pick and choose from. You look at that map, best place to put this is where the boat ramp is, where all the kayaks are stored, where you could keep people out of the way from other boat activity, dolphin activity on this point, and I think the applicant needs to go back and do their homework. Anything worth doing is worth doing done right. The board itself has raised some serious, had some serious questions about the location, and I think that it behooves the applicant to consider the installation of boat lifts. They've done nothing for 25-plus years at this location, and now we're asking you to give them a variance for their lack of attention to taking care of this own dock facility. As you know, you all own homes. What's going to happen if you don't paint your house? You don't take care of it. I think they need to come back and show you that all their options have been explored. We've heard nothing but some chatter about dredging, potential for dredging and installation and other facilities. You got 11 acres to work with. So I'm going to suggest that you vote this down today and you tell them to go back to the drawing board and perhaps may not even need a variance. Looks to me like you're getting deeper up in that north part of the site. Wouldn't you want the kayaks and the boats to be close to the most obvious place to launch and where you're going to have the longest length of time that you can use this 11 acres that you've been given? You're only going to come back again and again if this is what's going on here, and it seems to be based on this map over from 77 to 21. The river's moving the other way, and it's gaining size on the north. You want to be on the side where you're getting deeper. I mean, it's simple. So I think the applicant, that would behoove you to withdraw your application today. And I rest my case.
Thank you, sir. Thomas Hartnett.
I'm here for no matters, sir.
You passing? Okay. Lisa Snowden. Thank you. What do I got here? Yep. We are done except for you, Mr. Bonet.
Thank you.
Todd Bonet. I've actually been coming to Kiowa for over 50 years. Since the early 70s, my family had a place on Eugenia. My parents bought their first house, one of the first developments in West Beach, and we bought their place about 3 years ago. I'll keep my comments short. I commend the board for exploring less intrusive mitigants to the recommended solution here by the resort. The only other thing I would say is that there were quite a few references in the staff comments about commercial docks, and correct me if I'm wrong, other than the specifications allowed between a commercial dock and a private dock, I don't think there's really any distinction between a private dock versus a commercial dock. So to the extent that you were to consider, circumstances here that would be sufficient to grant a variance, I guess in my mind it raises a question as to whether or not you would be setting a precedent for similar expansion in private docks. The last thing I would say is that Ms. Hayes did make a comment that I think is a statement against interest, that the particular situation here is not unique, that it occurs elsewhere, and I think the board should consider that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before I close the public comment period? Okay, Ms. Hayes or anyone else from the applicant want to make some comments?
Thank you. There were a number of comments about it not qualifying as an exceptional circumstance, and so just to clarify, accretion and erosion are not unique to a tidal body of water. That was the statement that I made. That's the point I'm trying to make, that this is something that happens in a tidal body of water, something where hydraulics come into play, where water is moving. Those things can happen. That does not mean that our location is not unique, because it's not typical that someone would construct a dock, a floating dock, in a place where it's going to sit on the mud. So the fact that we are in a location where there's accretion, there are plenty of people who are in locations where there's no accretion, there's no change, it's a stable body of water. So it is unique in that aspect. There was a comment about, 2 comments about the hydrographic survey. I can tell you that the hydrographic survey on the drawings was performed at the end of 2021. So it should be up to date. There might be some slight variation, but the data that is on there is as accurate as we would have used for the application. So in other words, we got that hydrographic survey just prior to completing the drawings and submitting the applications. There was several comments just about moving out and necking down the waterway. And that training takes a lot of space. No doubt that people in kayaks take some time to get assembled and learn to paddle properly. I don't know all of the things that happen during that process, but as far as necking down, I think that if we're restricted to only being able to utilize the water side, that's only going to push Mingo Point to have to double dock their boats on the water side, right? So we're trying to restrict how far into the waterway we're going. There's nothing in any regulation that says we can't put two boats side by side or 3 boats side by side if that's something that they needed to do. So I think that needs to be considered too, because if they're prohibited, if they're restricted on the land side, then that is an alternative for them. I think that regarding that same discussion on, or the same point about kayaks taking time and space and training, that is exactly why we did not pursue moving the dock near the boat ramp. As I mentioned, safety was the primary issue up in that location because there are bends, 2 bends in the river, and when you have people who are inexperienced and sitting out there, that's not a good thing when boats come flying around the corners. The other thing is the activity of the boat ramp interfering with that, which raises the point about the no wake zone. And we talked about that with the property owners at the meeting. That is something that they can request from the DNR, and they should. That's not something that, I mean, I think that's a great thing to do in this location. The community dock versus individual dock, I'm not exactly sure what the direction was with that comment. There are regulatory differences in an individual versus a community. I understand you were making a point about a precedent being set possibly, but a community dock is typically, they allow a size based on the use and what's reasonable for the use. So there definitely is a regulatory difference in the two. There was a comment made about the lack of attention to the dock facility causing the need for the variance, and that is 100% incorrect. So there is nothing regarding the integrity or the condition of the dock facility that's driving this need for a variance. That is 100% related to the accretion. There was a comment made about having 3 to 4 feet of water, and that was plenty. That must be at high tide. I don't know, because I've been out there plenty at low tide and there is no water. 6 of 9 criteria not being met. I'm not really sure. Mr. Martin didn't go through every single one, but I think that our explanations for meeting the criteria were very compelling and concise. Liz?
May I speak to you before you go?
Sure.
I don't want to rehash all the points that you rehashed, but just two. A, you mentioned double docking. Currently, there's only one boat on the inside of the dock, and there is space for it on the outside of the dock currently, without expanding the dock. So why would double docking suddenly become an issue if you're not going to increase the number of boats and the number of usage on the dock? Number one. Number two, you say the situation is not unique. Yes, indeed, every river accretes and deteriorates. Different areas grow, certain areas don't. Why is it logical, for any reason, to rebuild in an area where you know you're going to have to rebuild later on? Why not find a different location? Thank you. That's all. I don't need an answer. I'm just posting.
Okay. The one thing I wanted to point out is that many of you may be aware that the town of Kiowa just spent the past year creating a marsh management plan, knowing that the marsh is a sensitive environment that needs our protection. This is the primary reason why we are asking to go further out into the marsh. We know that even if we're sitting on the marsh, say twice a month, that low flow of water underneath our dock is impeding the natural flow of water, and at some point, with the continued accretion, it is going to impede on the natural progression of salt marsh and spartina grass into the marsh. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to look towards the future, look at the trends, and create an environmentally responsible dock. We are sitting on the mud that is, as pointed out multiple times, preventing the oyster beds from developing in that area and preventing the natural progression of the salt marsh. Ms. Russ had pointed out that dolphins will strand feed on both sides of the river. Absolutely. 15, 20 years ago, we were seeing them strand feed between the inward side of our dock and the marsh. They can't anymore because there's no water there, there's no space. Allowing us to move out will allow the dolphins to utilize both sections of marsh. They like that sloping bank. It is the perfect location for them to continue the strand feeding. She also had made a comment that the best time to do this would be in pretty much the winter months, and absolutely we've taken that into consideration and would very much do this in the winter months when we have the least impact on the dolphins. And we would love to talk further if a marine mammal specialist is something that the community would be comfortable with us bringing out there during the construction process, something that we would be more than happy to do. Because the last thing that we want to do is to have a negative impact on the environment. Please understand the main reason for doing this is so that we're not sitting on the mud and we're protecting the salt marsh, which the town knows through the marsh management plan is vital to our natural ecosystem here on Kiowa.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. What is the construction term? How long, the length?
How long? Oh, gosh, I have no idea.
Between 1 and 2 months.
I'm sorry, I
Could
didn't
you
hear.
repeat that?
Between 1 and 2 months, we were estimating to build the dock.
And you would be totally shut down during that 1 to 2 months?
And no, we always find a way. So we will figure something out.
They wouldn't be offloaded to Bohicket or?
Yes.
So when speaking to some of the dock builders, we're fortunate that we have that parking lot at Mingo Point, and they can pre-stage and pre-build a lot of the equipment there so that we can operate from our dock currently until they really need to come in, take everything off, and then immediately put the new stuff in. So it's probably a much faster process than maybe other docks in the area because we have that giant parking lot that they can sort of pre-stage everything. And like Liz mentioned, we already, there was a comment about our tours operating daily, every day of the week. It's very true. However, the backside of that is that if there is a low tide, I'm the one that makes that schedule. I create that schedule. I manage the entire program. If there is a time where I can't utilize that dock, then we just call the guest and we move them over to the Andell Bluff area. So that happens pretty often. You may not see that from your perspective, but from our perspective, if we can't utilize it, then we just go ahead and move it to another location. That way we can, as a business, operate year-round from sunup to sundown for our guests.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank, yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Thank you for letting me ask it.
Please go to the podium.
Sorry about that. I'm Dorothy Connor, and I have a home in Inlet Cove, and I'm on the river all the time. One of the questions or comments was about the safety and people trying to get into the tour boats and crawling over kayaks. Have you all considered separating the uses so that this one we're talking about is only kayaks and moving the tour over to the ramp where someone else mentioned? That way because you've got two uses in one place right now. And I do see when I'm out in the water that is difficult for the customers. That's my question.
Thank you.
I can answer that. I believe the town has a regulation that we're only allowed one dock per property, so that where you're not allowed to build a second dock over there at the launch site.
Thank you.
OCRM, as well as OCRM, same regulation for OCRM.
I'm going to close this down at this point. Thank you, everyone, for your input. Very helpful. Now the board will deliberate. I'd like to get a sense of where people stand on these issues, and any comments you'd like to make before we get to actual voting.
I have a couple concerns. Number one, granting a variance is one of our requirements is not contrary to public interest, and it appears to be very contrary to public interest. And I do think we're setting a precedence for people down the river to be able to extend their docks past the town requirements.
I have similar concerns, and the other part is that this dock is pushing it all the way out. Is it a very narrow part of the river? And I just, everyone's talked about these boats coming through. I'm just not really sure. Safety being out that far is something I'm very concerned about. I'm just not there. Sorry.
Anybody else?
Personally, I think moving a dock further into the middle of a waterway that everybody has admitted has increasing amounts of traffic and a lot of novices on it is just increasing the risk of accidents, number one. You want to go beyond that, I still think building in an area that you know is going to fill in a certain matter of time, and depending on which of you spoke, it was either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years or 12 years or perhaps 20 is a number that means that nobody knows what's going to happen. It's a river. It's going to do what it does. Other people have addressed the fact that there are sandbars that show up and disappear in 3 years and then come back as if they were never gone. The location is, to me, untenable to have a spot that will give you what you want, which is a place where you can set up your operation and not worry about the location for 20, 25 more years. Everybody's worried about the marsh grass and the dolphins and this and that. I fully understand that concept, but I think the location is not tenable for what you want, and to simply force the issue by bulging out into the river is just the wrong answer, in my opinion.
I agree with what's been said already. It appears to be maybe a temporary fix, that we'd be looking at this 5, 10 years from now. There are some other options out there. I think there's probably need to put some additional thought into exploring those options. We've heard some today, so.
I'd just make a couple of comments. I do think this is more, this is not just about the resort and its operations. I mean, all of our property values and our quality of life depend on world-class amenities, of which this is arguably one of them. So it's in all our interests to do the right thing here. I guess the only other comment I'd make, or two other comments. One, we want to do this once and get it right because, as Mr. Bundrick pointed out, the primary environmental issues are about the construction. I did hear a viable alternative that I think could be looked at, which is the extending south, and I heard some of the property owners say that they, at least one of the property owners say they'd be willing to have a conversation about that. With that, I will ask if there are any motions that a member of the board would like to
Frank,
make.
I'd like to make a motion that the proposal is denied and that we turn down this application for variance.
I'll second it.
Who was that? That was Morris. Okay, it's been moved by Larry and seconded by Morris. Any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to call a roll call vote. If I can find what I'm doing here. Morris Hannon, your vote? Aye, yes?
Yes.
Jay Lewis?
Yes.
Lynn O'Leary? And Frank Cassidy, no, and I'll just state that I'd probably defer this if it were up to me, but it's not. So with that,
I don't get a vote?
Oh, geez, I'm sorry, Larry. I think I know what your vote is, but yes.
I vote yes.
Yes, okay. So
Always on the wrong side.
by a vote of 4-1, the application is denied, and we'll send this back to the resort for further study. So thank you very much. We'll take 5 minutes here while the hall clears, and then we'll go to the other three applications.
Yes, no one's voted for in the community.
I see.
Thank you for voting yes. No, I mean.
No,
I don't like to, misvotes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that should have been said, is it not?
Nobody supported it. Nobody.
Well, there were letters in support. There were 2 letters in support. There were. So, I mean, so that was the, well, nobody came, but there were 2 people that supported.
40 comments.
Right. Yeah, only 2 positive, yeah. I was so going to talk. That I knew it wasn't necessary.
I think it's been a long time since it's been out.
Exactly. Well, says, well, it may be unique, it may not be
They can do something about it. Sticking it halfway down. I was down there.
And then, like you said, what's this gonna happen again?
Oh, well, somebody else will do the same thing.
Barriers to something that's gonna happen again.
No, those are mine. They're not.
This is like, you notice I don't have any candy. No, I don't want any more. See you guys.
Hi, what's going on? I see some negotiation.
Okay. I better tell David I'm going to roll.
Everybody left.
Not surprisingly.
I don't know why they didn't want to stay. We still have a party.
Is 166 Marsh Hawk ready to go? Okay. I'll call the meeting back to order then, and I'll call the case BZA 22-0.
He's not here.
Oh, sorry. 1 second. We got one member missing here. I'm not doing well by Larry today.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll call case BZA 22-000008 at 166 Marsh Hawk Lane and ask John to go through the staff findings with us.
Yes. Our first case, BZA 22-00, or second case, 000008. The applicant, David Moody, Jill Moody. It's not Vignette Architecture, but Daniel Beck Architecture being the representative there. It's a typo in my screen. 166 Marsh Hawk Lane is the subject property. TMS 20703, parcel 23. Subject property is zone R20 in our residential overlay zoning district. is approximately 7,600 square feet in size. The request today is a variance for rear setback encroachment for approximately 54 square feet. The setbacks for this particular lot are 20 feet on the front, 3 feet on the right side with the wall, and 7 feet on the left side, and 30 feet at the rear. Here you can see the subject property is zone R2O, which is an overlay zoning district. Properties adjacent to the east and west are in the same zoning district. Properties to the south is adjacent golf course, open space, parks and recreation zoning district. Subject property is legally non-conforming with regards to setbacks. Per Charleston County records, the subject property was constructed in 1985. So here's the existing house. As I said, stated adjacent to the golf course at the rear. Properties similarly approach in size, adjacent. The applicant's plans include converting a portion of the existing rear deck to conditioned space and converting a portion of the existing rear deck into enclosed screen porch. And that area of encroachment is the reason for today's variance request of approximately 54 square feet. The proposed screen porch, it does encroach approximately 4 feet, 8 inches into the rear setback, and the ordinance does grant uncovered decks into the encroachment to the setback by 5 feet. So just a few images of the site. You see some trees on the left side. This is sort of looking at the rear of the properties. Similar in nature, adjacent properties at the rear, looking towards the golf course. And as you see in the proposed plans, the image to the left, site plan shows the existing conditions. And area to the right shows the proposed plans. Today's request is the area in blue. It is non-conforming as stated. The area in blue is actually the enclosed screen porch that encroaches, because that's going from an open deck, which would be allowed to go into the rear setback. But since it's being going into enclosed space, that's the purpose of today's variance request. Similarly, you can see the lot coverage dimensions proposed. The existing lot coverage is 42.67, and that's proposed to not change. Reviewing the applicant's, staff findings regarding the approval criteria. Regarding criteria A, there may be extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to this property. This is due to the existing non-conforming status of the structure and the existing trees on the property. Per the applicant's letter of intent, quote, this particular piece of property was developed in such a way that the majority of the building footprint was kept to the western side of the property, which preserved the trees on the eastern half of the property. Criteria B, these conditions may be unique to the subject property and may not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. Similarly, area properties are zoned as R2O residential overlay. In addition, the property to the south is zoned PR, or Parks and Recreation zoning district. It does sit adjacent to the golf course at the rear, where there's a 30-foot setback, and the existing structures in the vicinity may or may not have similar encroachments. The applicant has stated in their letter of intent that most building footprints in this neighborhood take advantage of the full buildable width of the lot and didn't concede half of the buildable width during the development to preserve the existing trees, and is therefore a unique condition. Criteria C, the application is ordinance, the 166 Marsh Hawk Lane, that would prohibit the modification of the structure. The existing structure does encroach, but the requirements of it does not meet the requirements of the 30-foot rear setback for the proposed modification. However, it does not unreasonably restrict the use of the property. And the applicant did state in their letter of intent that since the property was developed in such a way to preserve the trees on the eastern side while keeping the structure to the western half, and the deck currently exists and extends beyond the setback, enforcing a 30-foot setback would prohibit the owner's ability to utilize and improve the current deck and the structure. And so it seems to be unreasonable restriction of the use of the particular instance. Criteria D, the authorization of this variance may not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent properties or public good. The existing structure is legally nonconforming with regards to the setbacks, and the proposed modifications do utilize existing encroachment of nonconforming structure. The applicant has stated in their materials, quote, the property has an existing 6-foot-tall privacy wall along the nonconforming deck that extends beyond the 30-foot rear. So the conversion from deck to screen porch is not a significant intensification of use or structure, and therefore will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or public good. Criteria E, the granting of the variance would not allow the establishment of a use not otherwise permitted in the zoning district, extend the physically non-conforming use of land, or change the zoning district boundaries. And so the applicant has stated that granting the variance will allow for a use that is will not allow for the use that is nor permitted in this zoning district. Criteria F, BZA may not consider profitability when considering this request. And the applicant has stated in their letter of intent that this request is not being made because the property may be used more profitably. Criteria G, the need for the variance may be the result of the applicant's own actions. The existing structure is legally nonconforming. Per the applicant's letter of intent, the root cause of the need for a variance is the shape of the building to preserve the existing trees on the eastern side of their property. Is not a result of the owner's actions. Criteria H, the applicant granting this variance may not be contrary to the public or neighborhood interest, may not adversely affect other property in the vicinity, nor interfere with the harmony, spirit, and intent. These proposed plan does utilize an existing encroachment of converting open deck to an enclosed screen porch. The Architectural Review Board has also provided approval for this variance, stating, quote, the variance to increase your existing setback encroachment, the enclosure of your existing porch, and addition of a screen porch on your existing deck are approved to continue to permit submittal, outlining the following guidelines, noting that the town may also require approval. The applicant has stated in their letter of intent that granting this variance will not be of contrary to the public or neighborhood interest, nor will it be adversely affect other property in the vicinity, nor interfere with the harmony, spirit, and intent purpose of these regulations. And the final criteria, I, the granting of the variance may not substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan. The applicant's proposed plans does utilize an existing encroachment and do not encroach a greater distance into the required 30-foot rear setback. And the applicant has stated that granting of this does not substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan or purposes of this ordinance. Based on the staff's review of this application, if the board does consider approval of this application, we ask that the board should consider the condition of providing a copy of the landscape plan to show understory plantings on that lot edges on the western edge of the property. Are there any questions of staff?
Yeah, John, would you go to page, that's the one.
That one.
You said this is legally non-conforming.
Yes.
Currently. And it's the pink area that's non-conforming?
Yeah, so today the setback here, well, you can't see it on your screen, so I'll try to. This area here is the setback line.
Yeah.
And everything to the north of that, or planned north of that, is legally non-conforming. Since this structure was built in 1985, our zoning ordinance didn't come into 94, and so that's how we would determine that it'd be legally non-conforming. Does that answer your question?
Well, here's the real question. The real question is, I thought you were allowed to encroach 5 feet into the rear setback if it was an open deck.
So if it was open deck, yes. So this is being proposed as an enclosed screen porch.
No, I understand that part. I'm just talking about the way it is today.
Oh, so this would be beyond 5 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and looking at the other side there, I understand why the green part is non-conforming. If all they were asking to do was take that open deck on the left and make that into a screen porch, they wouldn't even be here, right?
Which If it was just this component here,
I'm not seeing where
oh,
you're
I'm sorry.
pointing.
If it was just this component here,
Correct.
yes, they would not need to be here.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I had. Other questions for, seeing none, Mr. Beck, floor is yours.
My name is Daniel Beck. I live at 131 Chadwick Drive in Charleston, South Carolina. I am here on behalf of the Moody's presenting this project. John did a great job of reading through our letter addressing sort of the variance criteria. A quick overview, there's an existing screen porch there sort of on the plan left side. That room they would like to enclose into a sunroom. In doing so, they then lose their screen porch. And in studying where to put it on the lot, instead of sort of building an additional footprint outside of what they currently are occupying on the lot, they felt like a good solution would be to cover a portion of their open deck. That is that sort of that little wedge shape in blue is the portion of the proposed screened room that would then be going on beyond the rear setback, which is then the reason for variance. We sort of met with the board, or the Board of Architectural Review. We looked at trees, we looked at the lot. Ultimately, we felt like this was the sort of the least impactful, and then went through this criteria to make sure it would make sense from a variance standpoint, because we sort of understand sort of how serious this board is. Obviously, just watching that last meeting, we get it. So ultimately, we felt like this was the best solution and sort of met the criteria, and that's what we're here for today. So taking a screened room and sort of, they want to make a sunroom. Obviously, I think COVID, people are at home a lot more than they used to be, and so this is sort of, they started studying their house, and then taking the open deck and screening just a portion of it, of which some of it goes beyond the rear setback, and we need a variance for. So thank you for your time. Again, John did a great job of reading through our letter. I don't need to read that again. If you have any questions, let me know.
Any questions by the board? Looks like we have no questions. All right, in that case, I'd entertain a motion.
Just, John, was there any comment from neighbors?
We did not receive any public comment.
Okay.
Okay. I'll make a motion that I think we should approve it. It's up to the homeowner to accept a slightly increased risk of golf balls hitting his screens. But considering the fact that the neighbors are not objecting or anything, and as the architect says, it seems like the maximum use of a very unique position. When I walked the property, you could see that they were so concerned about the environment that they didn't want to disturb anything when they located the house. The trees are still there. I think it's fine to let them do this. I don't think it's going to interfere in it. If they follow the landscaping plan thereafter, it's even going to be more enhanced. So I think definitely vote yes.
So the landscaping plan.
It's the landscaping plan
put that
included,
in there
yes.
into your motion. Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. The application is approved. It's a reasonable accommodation. It keeps the existing footprint and preserves trees. So thank you. Okay, next we have 366 Helena Court. I'll call case BZA 22-000-009. John, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next case, BZA 22-000009. The applicant, property owner Robert Niplock and Melanie Niplock, being represented by Stephen D'Amato of Remark Studio. Subject property is 366 Helena Court. This is located out in Ocean Park, TMS number 265-1600183. Subject property is zone R2 residential, and the property size is approximately 153,786 square feet, about 3.5 acres in size. The particular variance today is for an encroachment of our required 25-foot rear setback for an existing gazebo for approximately 56 square feet. You can see the setbacks listed as 25 in the front, 25 in the rear, and 20 on the sides. This subject property, as stated, is located in Ocean Park, Helena Court, the furthest east extent of the island. Property is zoned R2. Similarly, all properties adjacent are also R2. There's a couple aerials of the site. It's adjacent to critical area, just about on all sides technically, as the critical area encroaches, kind of wraps the property primarily to the east. The subject property is currently under construction. It does have a flag lot, so it's a narrow, long entrance drive to get to the property. You see images of the critical area on both sides of that as you approach. Here's the subject property under construction and the existing gazebo that is the subject of today's variance request. These are images sort of to the rear of the property. Again, the existing gazebo from a different perspective. And this is sort of another view, sort of looking towards the property at the rear. So the proposed plans for this single-family house is cited. I'm sorry, the proposed plans include a new single-family house with the cited gazebo at the rear. As stated, the house is currently under construction. During the permitting process, plans were approved for a gazebo to be sited in a different location. And per the applicant, the original landscape design with the architect's original gazebo location was drafted at an earlier stage of the project and was revised after it was determined on site that the design would not be completely harmonious with the field verified existing conditions of the site. After starting the tree canopies, we updated the location of the gazebo and shifted our proposed lawn. Through field assessment between the design team, the architectural review board, the gazebo was sited differently than what was originally permitted by the town. And the Key Island, and the Key Island Architectural Review Board issued a variance approval for the new location of the gazebo. The Key Island Architectural Review Board did share that the current location was more feasible location of the gazebo to preserve a 6-inch live oak, and the gazebo was constructed. An as-built survey determined that a gazebo was constructed into a portion of the rear setback by approximately 56 square feet. And this was prior to the applicant revising the approved permitting documents with the town. The applicant notified the town that the gazebo was shown beyond the setback, and so based on that, this was sort of the path forward to have a variance requested. They did submit, as stated, to the Architectural Review Board, and the Architectural Review Board did share a request of approval of not more than 5.5 feet for the gazebo, given that this location does allow for greater preservation of trees and less visibility to neighboring home sites and the creek. Staff, I want to just show you kind of the locations here that have been identified. The area in orange, I don't know if that's visible to you, but that's the encroachment of where the gazebo is constructed. The original being cited, I'm sorry with the green. The green is the tree that's being requested to be preserved. I think I have a zoomer, that one. So number 2 is the location of the gazebo that's approved by the landscape architects. The as-built location is in the orange. The original plans were in the red, sort of off to the right. So when we look at the approval criteria for this particular variance request, there may be extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the property, and that's due to the shape of the lot, the existing trees on the property near the gazebo. The property is a flag lot with a narrow drive with a large buildable area. The subject property is significantly larger than adjacent properties. These conditions may be unique to the subject property and that they may not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. And the subject property is located in the R2 residential zoning district, so as adjacent properties. The subject property is currently under construction, and the adjacent property to the north is undeveloped. Existing structures in the vicinity may or may not have similar encroachments based on the current setback standards. When we look at criteria C, the application of this ordinance to 366 Helena Court, that would prohibit the placement of the existing gazebo as the structure encroaches into the rear setback, which is 25 feet. However, it does not unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. Without the variance, the gazebo would be an illegally non-conforming structure. And per the applicant's letter of intent, throughout construction, it has been a request and a requirement from the Architectural Review Board that tree preservation be a #1 priority. With this priority in mind, the location of the gazebo has shifted multiple times to avoid the removal of trees. Criteria D, the authorization of the variance may not be substantial detriment to the adjacent properties, the public good, or the public good. The existing gazebo does preserve an existing oak tree and may not be visible by adjacent property owners. The constructed gazebo sits approximately 20 feet from the OCRM critical line. And per the applicant's letter of intent, the gazebo as shown now and here, as it has been constructed, is completely screened through the preservation of trees and low vegetation, making it difficult to view from adjacent properties. The criteria E, granting of the variance would not allow the establishment of a use not otherwise permitted in the zoning district, extend physically a non-conforming use of land, or change the zoning district boundaries. And criteria F, the fact that the BZA may be utilized, the fact that property may be utilized more profitable is not a consideration for the BZA when considering this request. Criteria G, the need for the variance may be the result of the applicant's own actions. The existing gazebo structure is not permitted by the town. The existing structure was constructed with a variance from the Architectural Review Board, however, without a variance from the town. Per the applicant's letter of intent, throughout construction, as noted before, tree preservation being a #1 priority. With this priority in mind, the location of the gazebo has shifted multiple times to avoid the removal of trees. The location of the gazebo was agreed upon and ultimately built without realizing that it was constructed over the building line setback. Criteria H, the granting of the variance may not be contrary to the public neighborhood interest, nor may not adversely affect the property in the vicinity, interfere with the harmony, spirit, and intent and purposes of these regulations. The existing gazebo may be less visible from adjacent properties, and a 6-inch live oak is preserved with the location of the gazebo. On May 9th, the Architectural Review Board did approve the variance request for the stated reasons. And criteria I, this may not substantially conflict with the comprehensive plan or purposes of the ordinance. The lot coverage is not impacted by the change in location of this gazebo. Prior to the decision action, we did receive one public comment letter that's in your materials, having no objection to the proposal. And just outline, if you do consider approval in this particular request, staff is asking that you consider that the applicant provide a landscape plan showing additional planting of native plants between the structure and the OCRM critical line to the north.
Questions for John?
So the gazebo's already been built?
Correct.
Yeah, as I understand this, they were back and forth between the architect and builders and the ARB trying to preserve trees, and they moved it into the setback without realizing it. Self-reported to you that they did that.
Yeah, typically design changes that occur in the field, we would just be notified, and permitting would come back to the town to get that approval. And so in this case, that didn't happen. That didn't occur.
Yeah.
John, I have a question. Who runs this operation, the ARB or the town? Because the ARB gave them a variance and they built. I mean, how is the ARV giving them a variance when we exist as the town?
So they're two independent processes. The ARB has their process and we have our process. What staff is saying that the permitted approval project did not get the same second sort of wave of approval regarding the different location of the gazebo.
So in other words,
So essentially,
so the
when plans were
ARB's variance is not really legal, is what you're saying? The town's rules supersede the ARB. The ARB gives a recommendation, is that what you're saying?
The homeowner would still need approval from the ARB based on their standards and guidelines and their private restrictions between the property owner and the Architectural Review Board. The homeowner would still be required to meet the standards of the town.
Okay, so the ARB variance does not carry any weight?
For town approval.
In this room, it does not carry any weight, correct? It's a recommendation to us, but that's it. Am I misinterpreting?
I want to be careful in how I answer that. The Architectural Review Board's decision is considered evidence for your decision here today.
Right, so it's a recommendation. Thank you.
It's evidence. No, it's not evidence.
I'm not necessarily agreeing with what you're saying that it's a recommendation.
Okay.
There are two separate processes. In order for that homeowner to have approval for construction, they need to go through that approval processes for both entities.
Okay.
And so they have approval from one, just not the other.
Okay, but if the ARB says yes and we say no, the answer is still no. If the ARB says no and we say yes, is the answer still yes?
No, the answer would be no.
So the
But we're not, I wouldn't be.
You got to get two yeses.
They have to check both of the boxes.
Okay, thank you.
Separately, independently, two different procedures.
Okay, but they both have to agree.
Well, they both have to approve it.
Okay.
I mean, but if we approved and they went forward and the ARB didn't approve,
Yeah.
they'd have to answer to the ARB.
Okay, and if we approve and the ARB, if the ARB says yes and we turn it down,
Then they have to tear it down.
okay. Thank you.
So I guess my question is more to the representatives of this building, if I may.
Yeah, if we're done with John, Mr. D'Amato, you're,
Well, I'm not Mr. D'Amato, but.
Oh, okay.
So he's the landscape architect, I'm the builder.
Okay.
Matt Bird Builders, we're at 3690 Bohicket Road in Suite 4C. So the reason I thought it'd be best to come and represent our team, including the Niblocks, is because I've obviously been here through the process. These landscape architects, they had what would have been their fifth landscape architect on the project under the same firm. So there was consistently people changing in and out of the project. When we got initial approval from the ARB, it was under the assumption that we would work together on what's considered the activity lawn and the gazebo, all basically being one piece, because it was out in an area that wasn't covered. So we worked with Jen over the course, the project's taken almost 3 years. We worked from start to finish throughout the term of construction to figure out this activity lawn and the location of the gazebo. And if you, on that one where it shows the initial gazebo is out in the middle, there's no trees around it. So she had asked for us to do two things. One, to put the gazebo amongst the trees where you can't see it. And two, obviously not to affect any trees, both their roots or their canopies. So ultimately, after, I can't even tell you how many meetings, we end up in that spot where we've got the blue. Well, typically what will happen on any part of a project, they will send a DWG file to me. It goes to my surveyor. My surveyor comes out to the property and stakes whatever it is I'm asking them to stake. And it could be a property line, it could be the gazebo, it could be the house, blah, blah, blah. Here, we had it staked, and in meeting with Jen, she had asked that we slide the gazebo. There's a 10-inch oak, and I actually have it. I don't know if you could put this up. Can you put that up to show the...
anything.
Or
You could probably
pass it?
Pass it around
Okay.
to them. But if you want to point to anything, you can use that too.
Okay, thanks. So there, to the right of the gazebo, there's a 10-inch oak. To the left, there's a 6-inch oak. While in one of our last site meetings with Jen, she had asked that we move the gazebo back and to the right. When we did that, seeing that the gazebo had been staked where it was, we didn't have any concern with the setbacks. So we moved to construction. I then had an as-built done so that we could look at architecturally where the columns are and design where our stair system would be so that it didn't affect either the 6 or the 10-inch oak. At that time is when we saw that it was over the setback. I've been doing this over 20 years. It's the first time it's happened. At which time we went to the ARB, to Jen, got in front of the board. That's when they approved the variance. So the variance was post-approval, and it was based on, or post-construction, it was based on all the meetings we had had with Jen. So I think that might help with the question that you had. At that time, we looked on the as-built, and it's literally, they can do up to 20% of the setback. Well, it's literally, which is 5 feet. It's literally 5 feet, 9 inches. And this is a radius, so it's a little portion of it's not an entire line of gazebo. It's literally a little 9-inch piece of the radius. So I talked to Jen, and this is first for me doing this, and she said that obviously this was protocol to apply for a variance for that 9 inches of encroachment on the setback.
I had a couple of comments. I went out and looked at this place yesterday. My first comment is, what a piece of property. And my second comment is, I had trouble finding this gazebo. So it's not visible from the house, let alone from adjacent properties or from the river.
I saw you on the ring yesterday.
So I don't really have a question. Those are just my comments. Any questions for
So
the builder?
you're saying a 9-inch radius is 5 feet over the setback? Is what, do I understand it or not?
No, sir. So the gazebo itself is a 12-foot radius, but it encroaches 5 feet, 9 inches, and the ARB is allowed to give us the 20%, so the 5 feet. So we're literally over there being able to give us the variance by the 9 inches.
9 inches.
On just the outside of the radius piece.
Gotcha.
I guess what I'm most confused about all of this is that how many times, I understand that the ARB is like preserve the trees, but we built our house and we had to replace every tree we took down. So in order to keep the gazebo within all of these conformities, couldn't we have just planted a tree? Because my bigger concern is that now that it's built, we're going to, if we pass it, the variance, we've now set a precedent that, okay, a mistake was made, they built over into it, and are we willing to tell them to take this down? That's my concern, is just that, how did it get to this point?
A couple of things that, just from my perspective, I think the landscape architects and Jen, there was a lot of mitigation on the lot just because of how far it sits off the lot and so on and so forth. Back there, she was, throughout the whole process, was asking that we not take any trees down and not try to mitigate anything back there because of where the property is. It essentially sits out on a point way back behind the house on the right.
Right.
And if you're familiar with going down the Penny Creek at that area, where it was originally planned, literally sits right out in the middle where you can see it. So the board did not want that to happen. So again, the two criteria for her were not taking down any trees, and for us to put it where it wouldn't be visible from Penny Creek. And then, of course, at that time, not to do any damage to any of the trees there, including taking any out. We didn't remove any trees from that back portion of the lot.
But it looked like there was ways to, when I went out there the other day, biked out, it looked like, I mean, the gazebo is absolutely magnificent, but couldn't it have slid in even like 3 or 4 feet? Because it just looked like there was room.
Closer?
Well, not so much closer, but more to the side. Like, I wish I was out there to ask this question, but as you were out, as I'm standing out looking at it, and there's the dock behind it, it looked like there would be room to possibly have slid it, like, even if it was 2 or 3 more feet, you wouldn't have been within the encroachment area. It just looked like an oops, like now and thank you for self-reporting. I think that's important to say. But it is, the question that I have is that if you go ahead and say yes to this, if another builder has built something and they've gone over and they self-report, and we've now set a precedent saying, oh, that's okay, you can do that, what have we opened ourselves up to? That's my question to everybody.
I guess my own thought is, would we have approved this if they came in before the construction?
If it didn't,
Yeah.
there's 3 acres of property there. I mean, I think there's a way to slide it somewhere that it's not needing a variance. When you went out there, there was all kinds of property around this gazebo that, you know, if it was just slid a little bit in one direction or another, we wouldn't be in this situation. To say it's okay that it's built and we're going to let it stay there because it was an error.
I will say on some level, obviously, there was an error. However, we could not have slid the tree any further to the left because of that 1 6-inch oak, which is actually something that I'd asked to take out and to mitigate. So the 1 6-inch oak that's just to the left is the one that actually made us push it back further on the property and then further to the right. The 10-inch oak that's to the right, I mean, it's fine except for the canopy actually was encroaching on the roof. But it was that 6-inch oak to the left that's the one that Jen would not let us take out, or didn't want us to take out.
Mm-hmm. Well, then even if we had looked at the scale of it, could it have been made smaller? I'm just asking questions. I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just, again, it's.
No, I understand.
No, I agree. In the past, we've said, you know, we're not big fans of people asking for forgiveness, you know, after the fact.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions. I know you say it's only a small 9-inch intrusion, but you're asking for a 56 square foot variance, if I'm correct.
I think he miswrote that. It's because it's 5 feet 6 inches from the setback. That's encroaching on the setback. He thought it was 5 feet 6 inches. It's not 50. It's probably less than a square foot. It literally just clips the corner of the radius.
John,
That
do you
9
have
inches.
any answer on that, please?
But that's not what it's showing.
The area that the 20% rule, I think, is the clarification that needs to be highlighted here, that it probably isn't clarified, which he's referencing. So the 20%, which the Architectural Review Board has the ability to grant what we call a approval exception beyond what is standardly allowed by setbacks. So that would reduce the total encroachment to what he's saying, to the 9 inches. So in retrospect, the entire encroachment is 56, but with the granting of the ARB's 20% rule of conditions, that would be only a 9-inch radius.
Thank you. Perfect clarification.
Any other questions for either
I
of these
just
folks?
find it unique on a 3.5 acre property. I agree with Lynn that couldn't find a place that fit in within the rules. I mean, building it and then asking for a variance, to me, is wrong.
Yes.
It's just my opinion.
Yep. Okay. I'd entertain any motions that anyone would care to make.
Do you want me to move? I'll make a motion that they have to relocate it within the property line. You all vote it down, but that's my motion. I don't like people building things and then coming for a variance. That's just me.
Well, I'm going to second that because I clearly feel the same way that Larry does, that it's a big piece of property. And as beautiful as it is, I feel terrible saying this, is that there's 3.5 acres there, a little bit here and a little bit there.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion?
Just clarify, it's a motion to deny the variance, correct?
Correct.
Yes, it's a motion to deny.
To deny and, yeah. My own comment would be that this was done innocently. It was done because of a lot of back and forth and looking at the various trees and everything, and that it was self-reported. I think it's a little excessive to ask them to rebuild it when this thing is so well shaded from other properties and from the river as it is, so.
Are we allowed to make comments at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just gonna put this out there. So I decide on my property that I have an area that is, I want to put in a fire pit, and I'm a little walkway out there. And I'm gonna go close to my critical line, and it's not permitted in my area where I live in the preserve. If I go and I put it in there, and then I say, oh, I did this, I'm gonna come for forgiveness, are you not gonna ask me to take that down? Is it because of the beautiful quality of the gazebo that we feel bad about saying we're gonna give them the variance? Or is it more of the rule of it's 3.5 acres, and even though it's a very small sliver, they still skid through? So the question is are we looking at it and saying, because they self-report it and because it's such a beautiful gazebo, are we willing to say, okay, we're going to approve this variance? Or are we saying it's a matter of principle and that it was built and it's non-conforming? That, just see what I'm saying, Frank?
I do. We all have our own reasons for how we're going to vote on this. My own is, as I stated before, if they had come in pre-construction, saying because of all the trees, yada, 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 we had to put this thing here, and it's a minor incursion into the setback, I'd probably vote for it. Now, that's a theoretical, and we all understand mea culpa. We wish they hadn't done it, but it's done. And it seems like a tremendous waste to make them rebuild it. Any other questions before we vote?
I still disagree. I agree with Lynn. A fait accompli does not bypass the law.
Understood. Okay, let's vote. Larry, vote yes.
I vote for my motion to deny.
To deny, yes. Jay?
No.
No.
Morris? No.
I vote for the motion to deny.
You vote yes.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank votes no. So that motion is denied. The motion to deny is not approved. Any further motions by anyone?
I'll make a motion to approve.
And I'll second. Any further discussion? Okay, Larry?
No.
Jay?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Lynn? That was?
No.
No. And Frank? Yes. By a vote of 3-2, the motion is approved to grant the variance. And I think that the thinking of the majority is that this was an innocent mistake, and it is a reasonable accommodation of the setback variance.
Here's your paper.
Okay, we'll close that. Okay.
Thank you.
That was, yeah.
Okay, I'll now call case 518 Ruddy Turnstone Drive, case BZA 22000010. John.
We are on the home stretch.
Yes. Thank God.
So our final case today, BZA 000010. The subject property is at 518 Ruddy Turnstone. The applicants, James Audio Laura Blim. The architect being representative by the applicants, Bill Sense. This property is zoned R1 residential, is approximately 16,825 square feet. And the purposes of today's variance request is for a rear and side setback encroachment, and this is for a proposed new single-family residence. The existing or required setbacks rather is 20 feet on the front, 15 on the sides, and that's adjacent to lot 517, 30 on the sides at the lagoon, and 30 feet at the rear. Here you can see the subject property, the critical area to the east, to the north, and to the west are adjacent R1 zone properties. Just across the way are R2 zone properties. So there's a mixture of zoning districts here adjacent or in the vicinity of this subject property with different standards. To the south also is just open space there at the lagoon. The subject property is adjacent to the, sorry, these are not the right images here. Sorry, but this is not the correct areas.
That's Marsh Hawk.
518, here's the current, like I said, the current property is undeveloped or currently vacant. Mature vegetation on the site. Critical area sits to the rear of the property. The proposed plans for this property include a new single-family residence, and the applicant states that the proposed variance request is to shift the entire house about approximately 5 feet over the rear setback and over the side setback, and that proposed design was made to fit within the current setbacks. However, would require the removal of a 21-inch live oak at the front of the house. And so the area of encroachment to the rear and side setback is approximately 167 square feet. And the proposed structure encroaches into the rear by approximately 112 square feet, and into the side, approximately 55 square feet. The proposed lot coverage is approximately 25.2%. Here are adjacent properties. The proposed residence. Here you can see what's being proposed for the variance. The encroachment to the rear here and to the side setback here, approximately 55 feet, which does not include the portions of open deck because that would be allowed by our ordinance today. The applicant has submitted to the Architectural Review Board, and the Architectural Review Board has granted approval, primarily stating the reasons the applicant has shared to preserve the 21-inch live oak at the front stair and an 18-inch oak at the paving cutout. Staff did visit the site on the 28th of November, and regarding the approval criteria, there may be extraordinary and exceptional conditions to this particular piece of property due to the existing mature vegetation and the trees on the vacant site, the irregular shape of the lot, and the required setbacks, including the side setback along the OCRM critical line. The applicant letter of intent does state the presence of only a few live oaks on the site presents an opportunity to attempt to save one that would be destroyed. The site itself is also a unique shape due to the marsh grass line on the rear and side of the lot. These conditions may be unique to the subject property, may not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. The subject property's irregular shape is noted with the OCRM critical line, and the subject property is also located in the R1 zoning district. Properties, as noted before, in the vicinity across the way are R2. Adjacent properties are R1 zone properties. The subject property does sit adjacent to another vacant undeveloped lot to the north, and the subject property sits to an existing single-family residence to the west. Based on encroachments, existing structures may or may not have similar encroachments. The applicant has noted that the shape of this lot is unique, as the OCR critical line has dictated. Criteria C, the applicant's application of this ordinance to 518 Ruddy Turnstone would prohibit this construction, as the proposed structure does encroach into the required setbacks. However, it does not unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. The applicant's letter of intent does state both the design house and deck are located within the setbacks, and shifting the house would maintain more of the property's current nature. Criteria D, the authorization of variance may not be of substantial detriment to the public or adjacent properties. The proposed structure is approximately 27 feet from the rear critical line, approximately 28 from the side critical line, and the encroachment into the side and rear setback is approximately 5 feet. The adjacent property to the north is currently vacant, and the applicant has stated before the preservation of the 21-inch live oak would not bring detriment to the adjacent property, public good, or character of the zoning district. And the tree would only provide further screening from adjacent properties. The lot is also unique to drainage easements as the rear and side with no less impact to the neighboring homes. Criteria E, just flipping through some of the renderings that were provided by the applicant. Criteria E, variance would not allow the establishment of a use not otherwise permitted, extend physically a non-conforming use of land, or change the zoning district boundaries. And the applicant letter of intent has stated that variance approval would not change the permitted use of the property. Criteria F, the BZA may not consider profitability when considering this variance request, and per the applicant's letter of intent, the client's sole purpose is to make Kiowa into a place of permanent residence. The clients have no intention of selling, renting, or flipping the property. Criteria G, the need for the variance may be the result of the applicant's own actions. The current site is undeveloped. Per the applicant's letter of intent, the need for the variance is not the result of the client's or applicant's own actions. And criteria H, granting of the variance may not be contrary to the public or neighborhood interests, may not adversely affect property in vicinity, nor interfere with the harmony, spirit, and intent. The proposed plans to preserve a 21-inch live oak tree to the north are included there. And the Architecture Review Board, as stated in their in their approved variance, stating they approved this variance in order to preserve that 21-inch live oak at the fronts there, and then the 18-inch at the paving cutout. Per the applicant's letter of intent, the granting of the variance would not be contrary to the public or neighborhood, nor will it affect other property in the vicinity, nor interfere with the harmony, spirit, and intent and purposes of these regulations. The ARB has favored efforts of saving natural elements by requesting a setback variance. And the final criteria, granting of the variance may not be of substantial conflict to the comprehensive plan or the purposes of the ordinance. The applicant's proposed plans encroach minimally into the rear side setback that sit adjacent to open space. And the applicant has stated in their letter of intent, granting of the variance does not conflict with the comprehensive plan or purposes of the ordinance. And so the appeals action of the Board of Zoning Appeals to approve with conditions or deny the stated reasons for the required 30-foot rear and 30-foot side setback encroachment. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Questions for John?
John, was there any comment from neighbors?
No received public comments. While I was on site, once I did talk to adjacent property owner while I was on site, but it didn't kind of show any concern significantly.
So are the lots to the west and north, are they developed?
No, so, sorry. I'm trying to find
I
out.
think they are developed.
I think this was the last one that needed to be developed on that
This one is
street.
developed, this one is developed, this one is not.
I'm actually seeing your,
So that's undeveloped, that's undeveloped. Is that correct?
Yeah, the one above is undeveloped, the one to the left is, the one to the left bottom corner is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
These two. Yeah.
Anything else? Mr. Sense?
I'll try to keep this short and sweet. My name is Bill Sense. I'm with Vignette Architecture. We designed a house that currently does fit within the existing setbacks. So I just want to address that now. What we are just trying to do, though, is preserve the natural existing vegetation, more specifically in front of the house. That would give us an additional layer of screening and character. But in return, though, by moving it 5 feet to the right side toward the lagoon, gives us a little bit more separation to the immediate neighbor on the left, which I think is very positive, as that might seem the neighboring houses, I think, if built within the current setbacks, it would feel a little tight. And then moving it to the right and a little bit further down in the general diagonal direction, we're not asking for a variance for the entire linear width of the house. It's actually just certain portions. So obviously the open deck would be allowed, but the portion in the bottom is about 55 square feet that faces towards the drainage easement, and the part that faces towards the lagoon, I think, is around 112 square feet. And that's really it. I'm not trying to overcomplicate it.
Any questions for Mr. Sense?
I just think you've done an admirable job designing a house for that location.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really very functional.
Particularly with this big U in the back.
The
that
idea
you
of
have to deal with.
a sight line at the alligators in the lagoon would be perfect.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay, someone care to make a motion?
I'm the direct neighbor, I'd like to comment.
I can't hear you, sir.
I'm the direct neighbor to the property, I'd like to comment if I could.
Yeah, please come up.
Sure.
Afternoon, Tom Hartnett. We reside at 519 Ruddy Turnstone, my wife Donna and I. We've been living there almost 4 years now, and prior to that, 25 years vacationing here. First off, I want to start, not to throw anyone to get nervous, I fully approve the setback. It will allow for a tree that is in our line of sight, and we have made a very substantial investment in the landscaping on our property and want to keep as many trees as possible as they develop this property. There was a comment made, and I hope I'm interpreting it correctly, but something to the effect of, the lot is also unique to drainage easements as the rear and side with no less impact to neighboring homes. Granted, no matter where you put the house, it's not going to change the drainage, but there are significant flood issues on this property and all the adjacent ones. I say it jokingly, but it is a serious concern. All three properties, ours, this one, and the Munduns, go underwater. And it seems to have been exacerbated by the flooding mitigation that was done to help Kiowa Island Parkway. I don't say that with great authority. I'm not a civil engineer. It is just something to keep in mind as the property is developed. And I did want to just mention to the architect, as the landscape architect plan is developed, there has been some lack of clarity regarding where Live Oak 31 is. It's on the property on the upper left next to the driveway. On one set of drawings I had, it was on the wrong side of the landscape fence that's to be put in for preservation. If that live oak were to be damaged to the point where its health is questionable, that is an enormous live oak at the end of the street. That would change the whole character of the property. And I know that's not what we're talking about today, but as we look at live oaks, let's be sure that that one is taken care of. And also any other trees that could remain, and how the landscape architecture of the buffer between the two properties is developed. As the property owner, I'm very amenable to working with you, allowing that development to come onto our side. It's about 13 feet long, and we'd like as much property as possible. But yeah, that was all I had. Really, as I said, I wanted to support it. Let's keep as many trees as possible. Let's keep a dialogue open regarding development of the overall landscape plan. within all the requirements. And as an aside, and this is subjective, I agree. My neighbor on the other side, Reggie, and I talked about buying the property, and on our assessment was there's no one in the world who's ever going to buy this property and be able to put a house there. And about 4 days later, as we were still ruminating, they bought it and built it. So, oh well. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions for me?
Mr. Sens, any comments?
Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I'm aware of the 31-inch oak at the end of the driveway, and couldn't agree more, where we do not want to mess around with that tree at all, so that character is going to remain intact. And then as regarding the landscaping buffering between the neighbor and us, we're also in agreement that there will be a thoughtful landscaping plan to address that comment.
Thank you, sir.
And put pontoons on the house for the flooding.
Yeah, it's the nature, I guess, of living in Kiowa.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm Becky McSwain. I live at 300 Salt Meadow, which is directly across the lagoon. And my entire all my glass windows in my bedroom, the house I live in, I didn't build it, was built probably too close to the lagoon as it is. And so they're going to stare right into my bedroom. So I'm just asking also for, since they're doing the setback, that's 5 feet closer to me. And please just make sure that I have, that there's lots of landscape, because that was something I didn't see as part of the submission, is the landscape proposal. And also, when we had the flooding, we're having a serious problem with erosion around the edges, sides of our lagoon, and also on the river side. And some of the neighbors have been applying to try to get, the bulkheads put in, and it's being turned down. I guess it's by DHEC or whoever it is that approves those things. So that's my only other concern, is that make sure that the owners know that coming back closer, they're getting closer to flooding. Because I had water up under my house.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
If there are no other comments, I'll entertain any motions that anyone would care to make.
I motion that it be approved.
Second.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Was there a contingent on a landscaping plan being submitted or not?
Is that okay with you, Morris? Okay, we'll add the landscaping plan, John, particularly towards your comment.
Yeah, with a landscaping plan provided.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all for your patience today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Congratulations on your re-election.
Thanks a lot. Our condolences.
John, where do we stand on the February?
We do have a case in February? Okay.
See you later.